The candle went out the moment the door slammed shut, and Serafina Ashworth found herself standing in the dark, gripping a letter that had just ended her entire life. "You will leave before sunrise," the Duke of Rothmere said again, his voice flat, as if he were discussing the weather, instead of throwing a young woman out of the only home she had ever known. "The carriage is already prepared. You will not argue with me on this." Serafina's hands trembled as she looked at the letter he had thrown at her feet minutes earlier. It was full of lies, cruel and carefully written lies, claiming she had disgraced the family name in front of half the nobility of London. She had done nothing wrong. She had simply been in the wrong room, at the wrong time, and someone far more powerful than her had needed a person to blame. "Your Grace, please," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady, even though her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "I have done nothing to deserve this. Someone has lied to you." The Duke did not even look at her. He stood by the fireplace of his study, his tall frame outlined by the orange light, his face unreadable. Edmund Rothmere was a man who had spent his whole life avoiding scandal, and now, with rumors spreading like fire through the drawing rooms of the city, he needed someone to disappear. Serafina, his ward since childhood, someone with no parents to defend her and no fortune to protect her, was the easiest person to remove. "It does not matter what you have or have not done," he said coldly. "What matters is what people believe. And right now, everyone believes you are the reason my family's name is being whispered about in every corner of this city. I cannot have that. I will not have that." "Where am I to go?" Serafina asked, her voice barely above a whisper now. "Blackthorn Hollow," the Duke answered, and for the first time, something like satisfaction crossed his face. "An old estate on the far edge of my lands. It has been empty for years. No one goes there. No one will remember you exist. That is precisely the point." Serafina felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Blackthorn Hollow. She had heard the name whispered by servants when they thought no one important was listening. A house left to rot, surrounded by wild land, said to be unlucky, said to be cursed by those who like to tell frightening stories by candlelight. It was not a home. It was a grave with a roof. "You cannot mean this," she said, finally letting her voice rise. "You are sending me away to vanish." "I am sending you away to survive," the Duke corrected her sharply, turning to face her at last. His eyes were cold, but there was no cruelty burning in them, only the exhausted decisiveness of a man protecting his position at any cost. "If you stay here, the scandal will destroy everything I have built. If you go to Blackthorn Hollow, you disappear quietly, and in a few months, no one will remember your name at all. That is the kindest option I can offer you." Serafina wanted to scream, to demand justice, to name the person who had truly caused the disgrace being placed on her shoulders. But she knew, standing there in that cold study, that none of it would matter. The Duke had already decided her fate before she had even entered the room. Arguing further would only harden his resolve. "Very well," she said quietly, straightening her spine even as everything inside her wanted to collapse. "I will go." The Duke seemed almost surprised by her sudden composure, but he said nothing more. He simply gestured toward the door, dismissing her as if she were no more than an unwanted guest overstaying her welcome. That night, Serafina packed the only belongings that were truly hers: a small collection of books, a locket that had belonged to her mother, and a few plain dresses that had never been fashionable, even when they were new. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that tears changed nothing in a world built by powerful men who made decisions without ever considering the people those decisions crushed. By the time the carriage rattled out of the Rothmere estate gates, dawn had not yet broken. The sky was a deep, bruised gray, and a thin mist clung to the fields on either side of the road. Serafina sat alone inside the carriage, her small trunk beside her, watching the only world she had ever known shrink into the distance behind her. The journey to Blackthorn Hollow took the better part of 2 days. The roads grew narrower and rougher the farther they traveled from the city, and the villages they passed became smaller and quieter, until eventually there were no villages at all, only long stretches of empty countryside broken by dark clusters of trees. The driver, an older man named Corwin, who had been assigned to take her there and immediately return, barely spoke a word the entire trip. When Serafina asked him about the estate, he only shook his head slowly. Not much to tell, my lady, he said, keeping his eyes fixed firmly on the road ahead. It's been empty a long while. Folks around these parts don't care much to go near it. Why is that? Serafina pressed, curiosity briefly overpowering her sorrow. Corwin hesitated, his knuckles tightening slightly on the reins. Bad luck follows a place that's forgotten too long, my lady. That's all I'll say on it. Serafina did not ask again. She had heard enough ghost stories in her life to know that most of them were simply excuses people used to explain away abandonment and decay. Whatever waited for her at Blackthorn Hollow, she suspected it would not be a curse. It would be neglect, and neglect she understood far better than any tale of spirits. When the carriage finally came to a stop, the sun was beginning to set, casting long orange shadows across a landscape that looked as though time itself had abandoned it. Serafina stepped down from the carriage and looked up at the estate that was meant to be her prison. Blackthorn Hollow stood at the end of an overgrown drive, its stone walls dark with age, its windows either shattered or boarded shut. Ivy had claimed most of the western wing, crawling up the walls like green veins spreading across dying skin. The front doors, once grand no doubt, hung slightly crooked on rusted hinges, and the gardens that must have once been beautiful were now nothing more than tangled weeds and fallen branches. For a long moment, Serafina simply stood there, staring at the ruin before her, feeling the weight of everything that had happened settle fully onto her shoulders for the first time. This was where she was meant to disappear. This crumbling, forgotten place was meant to be the final chapter of her story. I cannot stay in the drive all evening, my lady, Corwin said gently from behind her, already unloading her small trunk. I must start back before the light is fully gone. Serafina turned to him, feeling a sudden, sharp pang of loneliness at the thought of him leaving her here, in this decaying place, utterly alone. Is there truly no one here, no staff at all? There is meant to be a housekeeper still living on the grounds, Corwin said, setting her trunk down at the base of the crooked front steps. An old woman, by the name of Hetty Marsh, if I recall correctly. Whether she remained after all this time, I cannot say. With that, Corwin climbed back onto the carriage, offered her a brief nod of what might have been sympathy, and disappeared back down the overgrown drive, leaving Serafina standing alone before the ruined estate as the last light of day faded into darkness. She did not allow herself to feel frightened. Fear, she had learned, was a luxury reserved for those who had somewhere safer to run to. She had nowhere else. This crumbling house was, for better or worse, her home now. Serafina climbed the crooked front steps carefully, testing each one before placing her full weight upon it, and pushed against the heavy front door. It groaned loudly, resisting at first, before finally swinging open into a wide entrance hall thick with dust and shadows. The last of the daylight spilled through a large cracked window above the door, illuminating floating dust particles that danced through the still air. The hall itself, despite its neglect, still held traces of what it must once have been. A grand staircase curved upward into darkness, its wooden banister, carved with intricate patterns now dulled by decades of grime. Faded portraits hung crookedly along the walls, their subjects long forgotten, their painted eyes seeming to watch her every movement. Cobwebs stretched between the crystal arms of a chandelier that had not held a single lit candle in years. "Hello?" Serafina called out, her voice echoing strangely through the empty hall. "Is anyone here?" For a long moment, there was only silence, broken by the soft creak of the old house settling around her. Then, from somewhere deeper within the building, she heard the shuffle of footsteps. An elderly woman emerged from a doorway near the base of the staircase, holding a small lantern that cast flickering shadows across her weathered face. She stopped abruptly upon seeing Serafina, her eyes widening with surprise. "Goodness," the woman said, pressing a hand to her chest. "I did not think anyone would ever come to this house again." "You must be Mrs. Marsh," Serafina said, stepping further into the hall, grateful beyond words to find another living soul within these walls. "I am Serafina Ashworth. I have been sent here by the Duke of Rothmere." Something flickered across the old woman's face, a complicated mixture of pity and understanding, as though she recognized exactly what it meant to be sent to a place like this. "Sent here, were you?" she said quietly, not really a question at all. "Well then, my lady, I suppose you had best come inside properly, before that door decides to shut on its own again." As Serafina followed Mrs. Marsh deeper into the house, past rooms draped in dust sheets and hallways choked with shadows, she felt something unexpected stirring within her chest, buried beneath the exhaustion and grief of the past 2 days. It was not despair, though despair would have made perfect sense given everything she had lost. It was something quieter, something steadier. It was resolve. The Duke believed he had sent her somewhere to vanish, somewhere so broken and forgotten that she would simply fade away along with it, unremembered and unmissed. But as Serafina looked around at the ruined grandeur of Blackthorn Hollow, at the bones of what had clearly once been a magnificent home, she felt something shift inside her, quiet but undeniable. This house had been abandoned, cast aside, deemed worthless by everyone who once called it home. And so had she. Perhaps, she thought, as Mrs. Marsh led her toward a small room where a fire could still be lit for the night, there was something fitting in that. Perhaps a forgotten woman and a forgotten house were exactly what each other needed. Before she could rest, however, Mrs. Marsh set the lantern down on a small table and studied her with careful, searching eyes. "You should know something, my lady, before you settle in properly," the old woman said, lowering her voice, as though the walls themselves might be listening. "This house has not always stood empty because of neglect alone." Serafina paused, one hand resting on the narrow bed frame. "What do you mean?" "The last family who lived here left in a hurry. Near 20 years back now," Mrs. Marsh continued, her weathered face tightening with old memory. "There was talk of debts, of arguments between brothers, of things said and done that could not be undone. Whatever the truth of it, they scattered in every direction and never returned, and the Duke's family took the land as payment for old obligations. Since then, it has simply been left to rot, forgotten by everyone who might have cared for it." "And you stayed," Serafina said quietly, "all this time, alone." "Someone had to," Mrs. Marsh replied simply, without any trace of self-pity. "A house left entirely to itself falls apart twice as fast. I could not save all of it, not with these old hands and no coin to speak of, but I kept the roof from caving in over the east wing, and I kept the worst of the damp from spreading into the cellars. It was not much, but it was something." Serafina looked at the old woman with new respect, understanding suddenly that she was not the only person in this house who had been abandoned and left to manage on her own. "Then perhaps we are not so different, you and I," she said softly. Mrs. Marsh studied her for a long moment, as though weighing something carefully in her mind. "The Duke's men come by twice a year, to confirm the house still stands and nothing more," she said finally. "They bring a small sum for basic repairs, though it is barely enough to matter, and they never stay longer than an hour. I confess, my lady, I did not expect anyone to actually be sent to live here, not truly live here." "Neither did I," Serafina admitted, allowing herself a tired, humorless smile. "Yet here I am." "Well then," Mrs. Marsh said, straightening her shoulders with sudden purpose, "if you are truly to live here, my lady, you had best see the rest of it before you judge how bad things are. Sometimes a house looks far worse in shadow than it does with proper light upon it." Despite her exhaustion, Serafina found herself following the old woman through the ground floor, lantern light guiding them past rooms she had not yet seen. A library, its shelves half collapsed but still holding a scattering of leather-bound books untouched by decades of dust. A dining hall with a long table split down the center, yet with tall windows that, once cleared of grime, would surely flood the room with morning light. A conservatory, its glass panels shattered in places, but its stone floor still intact beneath years of fallen leaves and creeping vines. With every room they entered, Serafina felt something new stirring within her, a strange, growing sense of possibility beneath the visible decay. This was not simply a ruin, it was a house holding its breath, waiting for someone willing to breathe life back into it. "It could be beautiful again," she murmured, almost to herself, as she ran her fingers along the cracked frame of the conservatory doors. Mrs. Marsh glanced at her sharply, an unreadable expression crossing her face. "Many have said such things before, my lady, and none remained long enough to prove it true." "I do not intend to be like the others," Serafina said, and for the first time since stepping off the carriage, her voice held something firm and unshakable. "I have nowhere else to go, Mrs. Marsh. This house is all I have left. I intend to make something of it, whatever that requires." The old woman studied her for a long moment beneath the flickering lantern light, and slowly, something like the beginning of respect settled into her tired features. "Then you will need more than good intentions, my lady," she said. "You will need hands willing to work, and coin we do not currently have, and patience enough to face every disappointment this old house is certain to throw at you." "Then I shall find all three," Serafina replied simply. Mrs. Marsh let out a short, surprised laugh, the first genuine sound of warmth Serafina had heard since arriving. "Well then, my lady, perhaps this house has finally found someone stubborn enough to match it." They returned to the small room prepared for the night, and Mrs. Marsh left her with the lantern and a promise to bring proper bedding come morning. Alone once more, Serafina sat upon the narrow bed and allowed herself, finally, a single quiet moment to grieve everything she had lost. The comfort of her old room, the false safety of a household she had never truly belonged to, the life she had imagined for herself, before a single cruel lie tore it all away. But grief, she reminded herself firmly, could not be allowed to settle too deeply. Grief was heavy, and she needed her strength for what lay ahead. She did not know, standing in that dust-filled hallway on her very first night at Blackthorn Hollow, that she was about to begin rebuilding far more than crumbling walls and broken windows. She did not know that the very estate meant to erase her from the world would soon become the reason everyone remembered her name. But as she settled into a narrow bed that night, listening to the wind moving through broken shutters somewhere above her, Serafina Ashworth made herself a quiet promise. She would not simply survive this exile. She would transform it into something the Duke could never have imagined, something no one could ever ignore. The candle beside her bed flickered once, then settled into a steady flame, as though the house itself had heard her promise, and, after years of silence, had finally found a reason to hope again. A section of the east wing ceiling came crashing down in the middle of the night, and Serafina woke to the sound of splintering wood and Mrs. Marsh screaming her name through the darkened hallway. She threw off her blanket and ran barefoot across the cold stone floor, her heart slamming against her ribs, following the sound of the old woman's voice toward the eastern side of the house. Dust and broken plaster filled the corridor by the time she arrived, thick enough that she had to cover her mouth with her sleeve just to breathe. Mrs. Marsh stood near the collapsed section, her lantern shaking in her trembling hand, staring at a pile of shattered beams and stone that had once been part of the ceiling above the old servants' stairs. "It has been groaning for weeks," Mrs. Marsh said, her voice unsteady. "I feared this would happen eventually, but I never thought it would come down so suddenly." Serafina stepped closer, careful of loose stone underfoot, and looked upward through the gaping hole where the ceiling had been. Beyond it, she could see the dark shape of the roof timbers, several of them clearly rotted through, barely holding the weight of what remained above them. "Is anyone hurt?" she asked quickly. "No, thank heavens," Mrs. Marsh said. "It happened just after I passed through, not 5 minutes before. Another few steps slower, and I might have been standing directly beneath it." The realization of how close disaster had truly come sent a cold shiver through Serafina's chest. This was not simply neglect any longer. This was danger, real and immediate, the kind that could cost someone their life if left unaddressed. "We cannot wait for the Duke's men to visit twice a year," Serafina said firmly, her mind already working through the problem even as dust continued to settle around them. "If this section is failing, others may be close behind it. We need help, Mrs. Marsh, and we need it soon." "Help costs coin, my lady," Mrs. Marsh reminded her gently. "Coin neither of us currently possesses." Serafina said nothing for a long moment, staring at the broken ceiling above them, thinking of her mother's locket tucked safely inside her small trunk, one of the only items of true value she still owned. She was not yet desperate enough to sell it, not yet, but she understood clearly that desperate measures might soon become necessary if she intended to keep this house, and herself, standing upright. "Then we will find another way," she said finally. "Tomorrow, at first light, I want to see every remaining room in this house, and I want to speak with anyone still living nearby who might be willing to work in exchange for something other than coin, at least until we can offer more." Mrs. Marsh raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the young woman's sudden determination in the middle of such a crisis. "You truly mean to see this through, don't you, my lady?" "I have very little choice," Serafina replied simply. And even if I did, I believe I would choose this anyway. Morning arrived gray and damp, though at least the rain that had threatened all night held off long enough for Serafina to walk the grounds properly for the first time. She discovered a small cottage near the edge of the estate, half hidden behind overgrown hedges, where an elderly groundskeeper named Wendell Cross had apparently continued living long after the family who once employed him had vanished from the property entirely. Wendell was a weathered man, with rough hands and a suspicious squint, clearly unaccustomed to visitors, and even less accustomed to being addressed by anyone claiming authority over the estate. "You're the one the Duke sent then," he said, leaning against the frame of his small cottage door, studying her with obvious skepticism. "Didn't expect you to still be standing after your first night in that crumbling old place." "The east wing ceiling collapsed last night," Serafina said plainly, deciding that honesty would serve her better than pretense with a man like this. "No one was hurt, but it easily could have been fatal. I need help securing the rest of the house before something worse happens, and I understand you have lived on these grounds longer than anyone." Wendell's squint deepened, though something in his posture shifted slightly, softening just enough to notice. "Longer than anyone still breathing, certainly," he admitted. "What is it you're asking of me, exactly?" "Your knowledge, to begin with," Serafina said. "You know this land, these buildings, better than I ever could hope to in a single lifetime. I cannot pay you properly, not yet, but I can promise you a warm meal each day, and my honest gratitude, and eventually, when circumstances improve, fair payment for your effort." For a long moment, Wendell said nothing at all, simply studying her with an expression she could not quite read. Then, slowly, something that might have been the beginning of respect flickered across his weathered features. "Been a long while since anyone asked for my help, instead of simply expecting it," he said finally. "Longer still, since anyone bothered thanking me for it beforehand." He straightened away from the doorframe, reaching for a worn coat hanging beside it. "Suppose I've little else to occupy my days regardless. Lead the way, my lady. Let's see what needs doing before that old house falls in on itself entirely." Together, they returned to Blackthorn Hollow, where Wendell inspected the collapsed section of ceiling with a practiced, careful eye, running his weathered hands along the remaining beams, testing their strength with quiet, methodical patience. "Rot's spread further than I'd hoped," he said grimly. "This section needs full replacement, and soon, or you'll lose the whole east wing before winter arrives properly. I can manage some of it myself, given time, but not alone, not quickly enough to matter." "Then we need more hands," Serafina said, already turning the problem over in her mind. "Are there others nearby who might be willing to help, even without immediate payment?" Wendell considered this, scratching thoughtfully at his weathered chin. "There's a young man in the village, name of Peter Ellison, skilled with wood and stone both, though work has been scarce for him lately. His family struggles more than most. Might be he'd welcome steady meals and honest purpose, even without coin up front." "Then let us speak with him," Serafina said. By midday, Peter Ellison had agreed to help, moved as much by Serafina's evident sincerity as by the promise of steady meals for his struggling household. Meanwhile, inside the kitchen, Mrs. Marsh had begun working with unexpected energy, clearly invigorated by the sudden sense of purpose spreading through the previously silent estate. She recruited her own contribution to their small, growing household, a sharp-tongued but skilled young cook named Ivy Prescott, whose family had once served a wealthy household before falling on hard times themselves. By the end of that first full day, Blackthorn Hollow, though still deeply damaged, no longer felt entirely abandoned. Voices echoed through its halls again. Footsteps other than her own moved across its dusty floors, and for the first time since arriving, Serafina allowed herself a small, cautious flicker of hope. As afternoon wore on, Serafina found herself standing beside Peter Ellison in the conservatory, watching as he examined the shattered glass panels with the same careful attention Wendell had given the collapsed ceiling. Peter was younger than she had expected, perhaps only a few years older than herself, with calloused hands and an earnest, focused expression that suggested a man far more comfortable with tools than with conversation. "This glass can be salvaged, some of it," he said, running gentle fingers along an unbroken pane near the base of the frame. "The frames themselves are sound enough, my lady, just neglected. Give me proper materials in a few weeks, and this room could hold light again, the way it was surely meant to." "You sound as though you understand this house already," Serafina observed, genuinely curious. Peter offered a small, almost embarrassed smile. My grandfather worked on estates like this one, years back, before such positions grew scarce. He used to bring me along sometimes, teach me what he knew. I suppose some of it stayed with me, even after the work dried up entirely. And why did it dry up? She asked, though she suspected she already knew part of the answer. Families like the one that once lived here left, or lost their fortunes, or simply stopped caring for the land they owned, Peter said, his tone carefully neutral, though something harder flickered briefly behind his eyes. Places like this were abandoned, and men like my grandfather, and later myself, were left with empty hands and no purpose. It is easy enough to feel forgotten, my lady, when the very people meant to provide for you decide you are no longer worth the effort. Serafina studied him carefully, recognizing something painfully familiar in his words. Then I imagine you understand better than most why I intend to see this house restored properly, regardless of how difficult that task may prove. I believe I do, my lady, Peter said quietly. And for what it's worth, I intend to help you see it through. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of quick footsteps approaching from the hallway, and moments later, young Ivy appeared in the conservatory doorway, slightly out of breath, her expression caught somewhere between excitement and concern. My lady, forgive the intrusion, she said quickly, but there's a rider approaching from the main road. He says he's come from the village, carrying word for you specifically. Serafina exchanged a brief, uncertain glance with Peter, before following Ivy back through the house, toward the front entrance. Whatever news awaited her, she suspected it would not be simple, not given how quickly rumors of her arrival had already begun spreading beyond the estate's crumbling walls. The rider, a young man barely out of boyhood, stood nervously near the front steps, holding the reins of a tired-looking horse. Upon seeing Serafina emerge, he straightened quickly and offered an awkward, hurried bow. My lady, he said, slightly breathless. I've come from the village on behalf of the local magistrate. He wished you to know that formal notice has been sent regarding your residence here, confirming the Duke's arrangement, and that no further correspondence should be expected from the estate directly for some months, barring emergency. Serafina felt a small, cold weight settle in her chest at those words. Months without word from the Duke, without any acknowledgement of her circumstances beyond the bare formality of confirming her exile. It should not have surprised her, and yet it stung all the same. A final, quiet confirmation of exactly how little she mattered to the man who had raised her. Thank you for delivering the message, she said, keeping her voice carefully composed, despite the ache settling behind her ribs. Please extend my gratitude to the magistrate for his consideration. The young rider nodded, clearly relieved to have completed his task, and after a brief hesitation, added quietly, If I may say so, my lady, there's already talk in the village about the work happening here. Folks are curious, some doubtful, but curious all the same. It isn't every day someone chooses to rebuild what everyone else assumed was beyond saving. Serafina offered him a small, genuine smile, despite her earlier disappointment. Then perhaps, in time, they shall have good reason to be more than merely curious. The rider departed shortly after, leaving Serafina standing alone on the crooked front steps, watching the road stretch empty and quiet toward the distant horizon. Behind her, the sounds of hammering and careful repair continued steadily within the house, a small symphony of purposeful effort rising against the otherwise still countryside air. She thought, standing there, of the Duke's cold certainty that she would fade quietly into irrelevance, forgotten within months by a world too preoccupied to remember her existence. Yet here she stood, only 2 days into her exile, already surrounded by people willing to labor alongside her, already the subject of curious whispers spreading through a village she had never even visited. Perhaps the Duke had underestimated her more severely than he realized. That evening, as the small household gathered around a simple meal in the least damaged corner of the dining hall, Wendell cleared his throat and spoke up unexpectedly. There's talk already starting in the village, he said, glancing carefully at Serafina. Word travels fast in small places. People are saying someone's finally living at Blackthorn Hollow again, and that she's not simply hiding away like everyone expected. What are they saying exactly? Serafina asked, curiosity mixing uneasily with caution. Mostly curiosity, Wendell admitted. Some doubt, naturally. A few, I'll confess, seem almost hopeful. This estate once meant something to this land, my lady, before it was abandoned. Some folks remember that, even now. Serafina considered this carefully, understanding the weight behind his simple words. The Duke had sent her here believing this house, and by extension herself, would fade quietly into irrelevance, forgotten entirely by a world that had already decided her fate. Yet here she sat, on only her second day, surrounded by people who had chosen, of their own free will, to help her rebuild something everyone else had abandoned. "Let them talk," she said finally, a small, determined smile touching her lips. "Let the whole village whisper, if they wish. I would rather be spoken of for building something new than remembered for a scandal I never caused." Ivy, still new to the household but clearly unafraid to speak her mind, glanced up from her plate with obvious interest. "Forgive my boldness, my lady, but might I ask what truly happened? That the Duke would send you somewhere like this?" Serafina hesitated only briefly, before deciding, once again, that honesty suited her better than careful evasion. She explained, simply and without exaggeration, the scandal that had never been hers, the blame placed unfairly upon her shoulders, and the swift, cold decision that had exiled her from everything she had once known. When she finished, silence settled briefly over the table, broken finally by Mrs. Marsh's quiet, steady voice. "Then it seems, my lady, that you and this house share more in common than either of us first realized," she said. "Both cast aside unfairly, both underestimated by those who abandoned you." "Then perhaps," Serafina replied softly, looking around at the small, unlikely group of people who had chosen to stand beside her, "it is time both of us proved exactly how wrong they were." Outside, beyond the cracked windows of the dining hall, the first stars of evening began appearing across a clearing sky, distant and quiet witnesses to a transformation that had only just begun. Blackthorn Hollow, meant to be a tomb for a forgotten young woman, was slowly, carefully, becoming something else entirely. And in the village nearby, curious whispers continued to spread, carried from household to household by those who could hardly believe what they were hearing. Someone was finally living at Blackthorn Hollow again, and unlike everyone who had come before her, this time, it seemed, she truly intended to stay. Someone had scattered broken glass across the newly repaired conservatory floor during the night, and Serafina stood staring at it in the pale morning light, feeling anger rise hot and sudden in her chest, for the first time since arriving at Blackthorn Hollow. "This was no accident," Peter said grimly, crouching to examine the scattered shards more closely. "Someone did this deliberately, my lady, and recently. The glass is still sharp, unweathered." Serafina folded her arms tightly across her chest, forcing herself to breathe slowly, despite the fury simmering beneath her calm exterior. 3 weeks of steady progress, 3 weeks of careful, exhausting labor, and now someone had crept onto the grounds in darkness to undo even a small piece of it. "Who would do such a thing?" Ivy asked, appearing in the doorway with a broom already in hand, her expression caught between concern and indignation. "Someone who does not wish to see this house restored," Serafina said quietly. "Someone, perhaps, who benefits from Blackthorn Hollow remaining exactly as forgotten and ruined as it has always been." Wendell, who had been examining the outer door for signs of forced entry, straightened with a troubled frown. "No broken locks, my lady. Whoever did this either had a key or knew precisely which window still opened easily enough to climb through." The implication hung heavy in the cold morning air. Someone familiar with the estate, someone who had perhaps visited before Serafina's arrival, or worse, someone still connected to the household in ways she had not yet uncovered. Could it be villagers, opposed to outsiders meddling with old properties? Peter suggested carefully, though his tone suggested he did not fully believe his own theory. "Perhaps," Serafina allowed, though doubt colored her voice. "Or perhaps someone wishes this house, and everyone associated with it, to remain quietly forgotten. I do not yet know who benefits from that outcome, but I intend to find out." Despite the unsettling discovery, Serafina refused to allow it to halt their progress. By midday, the glass had been carefully swept away, and Peter had already begun reinforcing the conservatory door with a stronger lock, salvaged from an unused storage room, deeper within the house. Whatever message the intruder had intended to send, Serafina made certain her response was equally clear. Blackthorn Hollow would continue rising from its ruin, regardless of who wished otherwise. Word of the small act of sabotage spread quickly through their tight-knit household, and by evening, even Mrs. Marsh, normally unshakable, seemed visibly troubled as she prepared their simple supper. "I have lived on these grounds many years, my lady," she admitted, setting a pot carefully upon the table. "I confess, I do not know who might wish to see your efforts fail so deliberately. But I fear whoever it is may not stop at broken glass alone." "Then we shall simply have to be more careful," Serafina replied, though privately, she felt the same unease Mrs. Marsh had voiced aloud, and more determined than whoever wishes to see us fail. Despite the lingering worry, the following days brought unexpected progress that helped ease the tensions surrounding the mysterious incident. Word of the restoration efforts had continued spreading through the surrounding villages, carried by curious travelers and gossiping merchants, until eventually, a small group of local villagers arrived unannounced at the estate's crooked front gates, drawn by curiosity, and in some cases, genuine sympathy for the young woman attempting such an ambitious task alone. Among them was a quiet, capable woman named Margaret Hollis, skilled in needlework and household management, who offered her services in exchange for shelter, having recently lost both her position and her home, following her employer's sudden bankruptcy. There was also an older man named Silas Thatcher, a retired carpenter, whose steady hands and decades of experience proved invaluable in reinforcing the estate's weakened structure alongside Peter and Wendell. "I confess, my lady," Silas admitted, during his first proper meal at Blackthorn Hollow, "I did not entirely believe the rumors when I first heard them. A young noblewoman, alone, rebuilding a house everyone else abandoned as hopeless. It seemed more legend than truth." "And now?" Serafina asked, genuinely curious. "Now," Silas said, glancing around at the increasingly organized household surrounding them, "I begin to understand why people cannot stop speaking of it." Serafina found herself deeply moved by the growing loyalty of these near strangers, people who owed her nothing, yet who had chosen, freely, to invest their labor and trust into her uncertain venture. Each new addition to their small community felt like another brick reinforcing not just the physical structure of Blackthorn Hollow, but something far less tangible. A shared belief that forgotten things, whether houses or people, deserved a genuine chance at renewal. Yet even as their numbers grew and repairs progressed steadily through the ancient halls, the unease surrounding the earlier act of sabotage never fully faded from Serafina's thoughts. She found herself watching the tree line at the edge of the property more carefully during her evening walks, listening more closely to unfamiliar sounds within the house at night, wondering constantly who among the seemingly friendly villagers might harbor darker intentions toward her efforts. Her suspicions were not without foundation. Late one evening, nearly 2 weeks after the incident in the conservatory, Serafina discovered a second act of quiet interference, this time far more troubling than scattered glass. Someone had tampered with the newly repaired section of roof above the servants' stairs, loosening several critical supports, just enough that the entire structure threatened collapse under even minimal additional weight. This was no accident, nor mere vandalism, Wendell said grimly, examining the deliberately weakened supports with a troubled expression. Whoever did this understood exactly how to undo careful work without it appearing obvious at first glance. This required knowledge, my lady, not simple mischief. The realization settled uncomfortably in Serafina's chest. Someone close to their restoration efforts, someone with genuine understanding of construction and structural repair, wished to see their progress undone, quietly and deliberately, without drawing obvious attention to themselves. "Do you suspect someone specific?" she asked carefully, watching Wendell's expression closely. The old groundskeeper hesitated, clearly reluctant to voice unfounded accusations against people who had, until now, seemed genuinely committed to their shared endeavor. "I would rather not speculate without proof, my lady. False accusations could tear apart the very trust we have worked so hard to build among ourselves." Serafina nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom in his caution, even as frustration simmered beneath her calm exterior. "Then we shall simply have to be more vigilant," she said finally. "Whoever wishes to see this house fail again will need to try considerably harder than scattered glass and weakened beams to succeed." Despite the unsettling discovery, Serafina made a deliberate choice not to allow fear or suspicion to poison the genuine progress they had achieved together. She gathered the entire household that evening, addressing them directly and honestly about the sabotage, without casting blame upon anyone present. "I do not know who wishes to see Blackthorn Hollow fail," she said, standing before the small group gathered in the newly repaired dining hall, candlelight flickering warmly across attentive faces. "But I refuse to allow fear of an unknown enemy to undo everything we have built together these past weeks. If someone among us harbors doubts or grievances, I would rather hear them spoken honestly than discover them expressed through hidden sabotage." Silence followed her words, though Serafina noted, with quiet relief, no visible guilt or discomfort crossing any face gathered before her. Whatever enemy threatened their progress, it seemed increasingly likely they existed beyond their immediate household, someone watching from a distance, someone with reason to fear Blackthorn Hollow's successful restoration. "Perhaps," Margaret suggested carefully, breaking the tense silence, "there are those who benefited from this estate remaining forgotten, my lady. Someone who profited, perhaps, from land left unclaimed, or debts left unresolved. All these years, it stood empty." Serafina considered this possibility carefully, recognizing genuine merit in Margaret's quiet observation. If someone had been quietly benefiting from Blackthorn Hollow's continued neglect, whether through unclaimed resources, unpaid debts, or some arrangement she did not yet understand, her sudden, determined restoration efforts might indeed threaten interests she could not yet fully see. "Then we shall continue forward regardless," Serafina said finally, her voice steady and resolute, despite the lingering uncertainty surrounding their unknown adversary. "Whoever wishes to see this house fail will discover, in time, exactly how mistaken they are." Determined to uncover whatever truth lay behind the sabotage, Serafina spent several quiet mornings, examining the grounds surrounding the house more carefully than she had before, searching for any clue that might reveal who had crept onto the property under cover of darkness. Near the edge of the eastern wall, close to the same window Wendell suspected had been used for entry, she discovered a small scrap of dark blue fabric caught upon a splintered fence post, fine and expensive in quality, entirely out of place among the rough, practical clothing worn by everyone within her small household. She held the delicate fabric carefully between her fingers, turning it over thoughtfully in the pale morning light. Whoever had left it behind clearly did not belong among the villagers or laborers who had joined her cause. This fabric spoke of wealth, of tailored garments belonging to someone accustomed to far finer surroundings than a muddy estate wall at the edge of forgotten countryside. "This belongs to someone of considerable means," she murmured to herself, tucking the fabric carefully into the pocket of her dress, determined to keep it safe until she understood its significance more fully. She said nothing of her discovery to the rest of the household that day, unwilling to raise further alarm, without clearer understanding of what it truly meant. Yet the discovery lingered heavily in her thoughts throughout the following days, a quiet reminder that whoever wished to see her efforts fail likely moved among circles far removed from the humble villagers who had chosen to stand beside her. Despite the shadow of uncertainty hanging over their progress, Serafina refused to allow suspicion alone to define their days. One evening, nearly a month after her arrival, following the successful completion of the conservatory's full restoration, Mrs. Marsh insisted upon marking the achievement with a small, well-earned celebration. "It is not every day such careful work reaches proper completion," the old woman declared, setting an unexpectedly generous spread of simple but hearty food across the newly restored dining table. "I believe we have earned a moment to simply enjoy what we have built together, my lady, worries aside for one evening at least." Serafina found herself smiling genuinely as her small household gathered that evening, sharing stories and quiet laughter around candlelight, reflected warmly against newly cleaned windows. Silas told humorous tales of past restoration projects gone comically wrong, drawing genuine laughter even from the normally reserved Wendell. Margaret shared gentle observations about the changing gardens, describing early blooms she had noticed pushing determinedly through previously neglected soil. Even Peter, usually quiet and focused entirely upon practical matters, offered a shy, genuine smile, as Ivy teased him good-naturedly about his habit of humming softly while he worked. Watching her small, unlikely household laughing together beneath candlelight, surrounded by walls that only weeks earlier had stood cold, dark, and forgotten, Serafina felt something powerful settle deeply within her chest. Whatever unknown enemy watched from the shadows, whatever challenges still lay ahead, she understood clearly, in that quiet, warm moment, that she had already achieved something the Duke had never believed possible. She had built, from nothing but ruin and abandonment, something genuinely worth protecting. As the celebration continued into the evening, Serafina found a quiet moment to step outside onto the newly repaired front steps, gazing up at a clear night sky, scattered generously with stars. The cool evening air carried the earthy scent of turned soil and distant wood smoke, peaceful and still, after weeks of exhausting labor and lingering uncertainty. Yet even amid that peaceful stillness, she found herself thinking again of the delicate scrap of blue fabric hidden carefully within her dresser drawer, a quiet, unanswered question regarding exactly who wished to see her efforts fail, and precisely why her success at Blackthorn Hollow threatened them so deeply. Whoever they were, Serafina resolved silently beneath the quiet stars. She would eventually uncover the truth behind their hidden opposition. Until then, she intended to continue building steadily forward, refusing to allow unknown fears to overshadow the genuine progress she and her small, devoted household had achieved together. As the days continued passing, their combined efforts slowly transformed Blackthorn Hollow's appearance more visibly than Serafina had dared hope. The conservatory, fully repaired now, flooded each morning with warm sunlight through newly cleaned glass panels. The dining hall's long table, expertly restored by Silas's careful craftsmanship, once again seated their growing household comfortably each evening. Even the once overgrown gardens had begun showing early signs of careful attention. Weeds cleared away to reveal stone pathways and flower beds long buried beneath years of neglect. Word of their progress continued spreading steadily through surrounding villages, curiosity slowly transforming into genuine admiration among many who had initially doubted such an ambitious undertaking could possibly succeed. Yet Serafina remained cautiously aware that somewhere, hidden among the growing whispers of praise, an unknown enemy continued watching their efforts, waiting, perhaps, for another opportunity to undo everything they had worked so hard to achieve. She did not yet know who threatened her efforts, nor precisely why her success at Blackthorn Hollow mattered enough to warrant such deliberate interference. But as autumn winds began sweeping across the surrounding countryside, carrying with them the promise of an approaching storm, Serafina found herself sensing that whatever conflict lay ahead, it had only just begun. By the following afternoon, dark clouds had gathered thick and heavy along the western horizon, and Wendell, studying the sky with the practiced eye of a man who had spent decades reading the countryside's moods, grew visibly concerned. "This will not be an ordinary storm, my lady," he said, securing loose shutters along the western wing with quick, efficient movements. "I have seen skies like this before. We would do well to prepare properly, and quickly." Serafina immediately organized the household into purposeful action, securing loose materials scattered across the grounds, reinforcing the newly repaired sections of roof against the coming wind, and ensuring adequate supplies were gathered safely within the house before the storm's full arrival. Peter and Silas worked together, securing the conservatory's delicate glass panels with wooden boards, while Margaret and Ivy hurried to bring in the last of the drying linens before the wind grew too fierce to manage safely. By early evening, the first heavy drops of rain began falling steadily against the estate's newly repaired windows, quickly building into a relentless downpour, accompanied by distant, rolling thunder. Serafina stood near the entrance hall's tall window, watching the storm intensify with a mixture of apprehension and quiet admiration for how far their careful repairs had already progressed. Only weeks earlier, a storm of this magnitude would likely have caused catastrophic damage throughout the vulnerable structure. Tonight, thanks to their combined efforts, Blackthorn Hollow stood far better prepared to weather whatever the sky intended to throw against it. "The roads will be treacherous tonight," Mrs. Marsh observed, joining Serafina near the window, watching rain lash violently against the darkened glass. "I pity anyone unfortunate enough to be traveling in weather such as this." Serafina nodded absently, her thoughts drifting briefly to the isolated nature of their surroundings, wondering idly whether any unfortunate traveler might find themselves caught unexpectedly by the storm's sudden ferocity along the lonely roads surrounding the estate. She had no way of knowing, standing quietly beside the rain-streaked window that evening, that fate itself was already guiding an unexpected stranger toward Blackthorn Hollow's crooked front gates, someone whose arrival would soon change the course of everything she had worked so carefully to build. For now, she simply watched the storm rage steadily onward, grateful for the sturdy walls surrounding her, and for the small, devoted household who had chosen, against every reasonable expectation, to stand beside her through whatever challenges still lay ahead. A frantic pounding on the front door tore through the sound of the storm, loud enough to startle the entire household into stunned silence around the dining table. Serafina rose quickly, her heart racing, exchanging a wary glance with Wendell, before moving cautiously toward the entrance hall. The pounding came again, more urgent this time, accompanied by a muffled voice shouting something indistinguishable against the howling wind outside. "Stay back until we know who it is," Wendell warned, moving quickly to stand beside her, though even he could not entirely mask the concern evident in his weathered features. Serafina approached the heavy front door carefully, steadying her nerves before calling out firmly, "Who is there, at this hour, in such weather?" "Please," came the muffled reply, a man's voice, strained and clearly exhausted. "My horse has thrown a shoe, and the road ahead is flooded beyond passing. I saw your lights, and hoped desperately for shelter until the storm eases. I mean no harm, I swear it." Serafina hesitated only a moment longer, before nodding to Wendell, who cautiously unbolted the heavy door. It swung open forcefully against the wind, revealing a tall stranger, standing drenched upon the front steps, water streaming from his dark hair and expensive traveling coat. Clearly a man of considerable means, caught unprepared by the sudden ferocity of the storm. "Come inside, quickly," Serafina said, stepping aside to allow him entry, though she remained cautiously alert despite his evident distress. The stranger stepped gratefully into the entrance hall, immediately dripping water across the freshly cleaned floor, though he seemed too exhausted and relieved to notice or care about the minor inconvenience. He was younger than she had first assumed, perhaps not much older than herself, with sharp, intelligent eyes and features that suggested both genuine exhaustion and quiet, careful observation, even in his current disheveled state. "Thank you," he said, his breathing gradually steadying, now that he stood safely beneath a solid roof. "I feared I might be forced to spend the entire night exposed to this weather. I am deeply grateful for your kindness." "You are fortunate our lights were visible at all through such heavy rain," Serafina replied, studying him carefully. "May I ask your name, and your business traveling through such isolated countryside during a storm such as this?" "Julian Hale," the stranger answered, offering a brief, respectful bow despite his obviously exhausted state. "A merchant, traveling between business engagements. I confess I did not expect to find any occupied estate along this particular stretch of road. Most maps I consulted suggested this entire area remained abandoned." "It did, until recently," Serafina said carefully, deciding not to elaborate further just yet on the complicated circumstances surrounding her own presence at Blackthorn Hollow. "You may remain here until the storm passes, Mr. Hale, and until your horse has recovered sufficiently to continue your journey safely." "You have my sincere gratitude," Julian said, genuine relief evident in his exhausted expression. "I do not wish to impose longer than absolutely necessary." Mrs. Marsh, ever practical, despite the unexpected interruption to their evening, quickly arranged dry clothing borrowed from Peter's modest wardrobe, along with a hot meal to help restore the stranger's obviously depleted strength. As Julian settled gratefully near the dining hall's warm fireplace, Serafina found herself studying him carefully, curious despite her natural caution regarding unexpected visitors. "Forgive my curiosity," Julian said eventually, glancing around at the clearly ongoing restoration efforts visible even in the dim candlelight. "But this estate appears to be undergoing quite ambitious repairs. I confess I am rather surprised to find such determined effort in a location most maps suggest has been abandoned for decades." "Appearances can often be misleading, Mr. Hale," Serafina replied evenly, unwilling yet to reveal the full complexity of her circumstances to a stranger she had only just met. Julian studied her thoughtfully for a long moment, clearly recognizing her deliberate evasion, though he chose, wisely, not to press the matter further. "Whatever your reasons, the work itself is genuinely impressive. I have traveled through many estates far better maintained than this one initially appeared, yet few possess such evident care and craftsmanship as what I have already observed here tonight." Despite her natural wariness, Serafina found herself unexpectedly pleased by his genuine admiration, something quietly warming beneath her careful composure. "Thank you," she said simply. "It has required considerable effort from many dedicated hands." As the storm continued raging steadily outside, the unlikely gathering around the dining hall's warm fireplace settled into cautious, but increasingly comfortable conversation. Julian, it quickly became apparent, possessed both sharp intelligence and genuine curiosity regarding the world beyond his immediate business concerns, asking thoughtful questions about the restoration efforts, the surrounding countryside, and the small, devoted household Serafina had assembled around herself. "You mentioned business engagements," Serafina said eventually, her own curiosity finally overcoming her earlier caution. "What precisely is your trade, Mr. Hale?" "Textiles primarily," Julian answered, "though I have expanded considerably into various other ventures over recent years. I began with very little, I confess, building my current position through considerable effort and, admittedly, no small measure of fortunate timing." "A self-made man, then," Serafina observed, genuine respect evident in her tone. "Entirely self-made," Julian confirmed, something quietly proud flickering behind his tired eyes. "I hold little patience, I confess, for those born into wealth who assume such advantages naturally reflect genuine merit or worth. I have encountered far too many individuals throughout my dealings who possess considerable fortune, yet remarkably little genuine character to accompany it." Serafina found herself smiling faintly at his candid observation, recognizing uncomfortable truth within his words regarding the very world she herself had recently escaped. "I confess, Mr. Hale, I share considerable sympathy with that particular sentiment." Their conversation continued deep into the evening, gradually revealing shared perspectives regarding fairness, genuine effort, and the quiet dignity found within honest labor, regardless of one's birth or circumstances. Serafina found herself, somewhat to her own surprise, sharing more openly with this unexpected stranger than she had with anyone since arriving at Blackthorn Hollow, though she remained deliberately careful to avoid revealing the full scandal surrounding her exile. Eventually, as the storm outside began gradually easing into steady but manageable rainfall, Julian glanced thoughtfully toward the window, watching lightning flicker distantly across the darkened countryside. "I confess, my lady," he said quietly, "I find myself genuinely curious regarding your circumstances here, though I recognize such curiosity may exceed proper boundaries for a stranger you have only just met this evening." Serafina considered his words carefully, recognizing genuine respect within his careful phrasing, rather than intrusive demand. "Perhaps, in time, Mr. Hale, I shall satisfy that curiosity properly. For now, I believe it sufficient to say that Blackthorn Hollow, much like myself, was cast aside by those who believed us both beyond redemption." Julian studied her thoughtfully for a long moment, something quietly understanding settling behind his tired but attentive eyes. "Then I believe, my lady, you have already proven them entirely mistaken." By the time the storm finally passed entirely, leaving behind only steady, gentle rainfall against the estate's newly repaired windows, Julian had fallen asleep briefly near the fireplace, exhausted from his difficult journey. Serafina found herself watching him quietly for a long moment, genuinely curious about this unexpected stranger who had arrived so suddenly into her carefully rebuilt world. She did not yet know, watching the gentle rise and fall of his exhausted breathing beside the dying firelight, that Julian Hale's unexpected arrival would soon become far more significant than a single stormy evening's chance encounter. Nor did she anticipate how deeply his quiet, steady presence would eventually intertwine itself within the ongoing struggle to protect everything she had worked so determinedly to build. Once Julian had been shown to a small guest room prepared hastily by Mrs. Marsh, Wendell approached Serafina privately near the entrance hall, his expression carrying obvious caution. "You know very little about this man, my lady," he said quietly, glancing briefly toward the closed guest room door. "A convenient storm, a convenient excuse, and suddenly, a stranger of clear wealth finds himself sheltered within these walls. Forgive my suspicion, but recent events have taught us both to question convenient circumstances rather closely." Serafina considered his words carefully, recognizing genuine wisdom within his caution. "You believe he may be connected to whoever sabotaged our repairs?" "I believe nothing certain," Wendell admitted. "But I have lived long enough to distrust coincidence. particularly when it arrives so neatly wrapped in charm and gratitude. Then we shall watch him carefully, Serafina agreed, without revealing our suspicion outright. If he proves genuine, no harm comes from caution. If he proves otherwise, we shall discover it soon enough. For now, she simply allowed herself a small measure of gratitude that the storm, despite its earlier ferocity, had ultimately delivered something unexpectedly valuable to her doorstep. Whether genuine ally, or something else entirely, still remained to be seen. The following morning, before Julian's departure, Serafina found opportunity to test her lingering uncertainty. As they stood near the stables, while a young hand prepared his recovered horse, she mentioned, seemingly in passing, the strange incidents that had plagued the estate in recent weeks. "Someone has attempted, more than once, to undo our repairs here," she said carefully, watching his reaction closely. "Scattered glass, weakened supports, that sort of quiet interference." Julian's expression shifted immediately from polite interest to genuine concern, no trace of guilt or evasion crossing his tired features. "That is troubling news indeed, my lady. Do you suspect a particular cause?" "Not yet," Serafina admitted, relief settling quietly beneath her measured tone as she recognized the authenticity of his surprise. "Though I did discover a scrap of fine fabric near the eastern wall, entirely unlike anything worn by those within my own household." Julian's brow furrowed thoughtfully. "May I see it, if you still possess it? I have traveled through considerable circles of wealth and trade these past years. Perhaps I might recognize its origin." Serafina hesitated only briefly, before retrieving the small scrap from her dress pocket, having carried it deliberately that morning, in case such opportunity arose. Julian examined it carefully, turning the delicate blue fabric between his fingers, with evident expertise. "This weave," he said slowly, "is not common. It comes from a particular mill outside the city, one that supplies almost exclusively wealthy households connected to established noble families. Whoever wore this was neither villager nor common traveler, my lady. This belonged to someone of considerable standing." The confirmation settled heavily within Serafina's chest, though it also brought a measure of clarity to her earlier suspicions. "Then whoever wishes to see Blackthorn Hollow fail moves within circles far above simple village gossip or petty jealousy." "It would seem so," Julian agreed, returning the fabric carefully to her waiting hand. "I do not know who specifically might wish you harm, my lady, but I would advise considerable caution regarding anyone connected to noble circles who might benefit from this estate remaining forgotten and abandoned." Serafina studied him thoughtfully, genuinely grateful for his measured, thoughtful assistance, despite having known him barely a single evening. "Thank you, Mr. Hale. Your perspective has proven considerably more valuable than I anticipated." "I am simply glad to offer whatever small assistance I can," Julian replied, something warm and genuine flickering behind his tired but attentive eyes. "Though I confess, my lady, part of me hopes this will not prove our final encounter. I find myself unexpectedly reluctant to continue my journey, given the circumstances I have discovered here." Serafina felt an unfamiliar warmth rising within her chest at his candid admission, quickly tempered by cautious reason. She had known this man barely a single evening, regardless of how genuine his character appeared. Trust, she reminded herself firmly, required considerably more than a single stormy night's shared conversation, however sincere it had seemed. "Perhaps circumstances will indeed bring us together again, Mr. Hale," she said carefully, offering polite acknowledgement without committing to anything further. "Until then, safe travels." Morning arrived clear and bright, sunlight streaming steadily through newly repaired windows, revealing a countryside washed clean by the previous night's storm. Julian, having rested sufficiently and inspected his recovering horse, prepared reluctantly to continue his interrupted journey, though something in his expression suggested genuine reluctance to depart so quickly from Blackthorn Hollow's unexpected warmth. "I owe you considerable gratitude, my lady," he said, standing near his now saddled horse, studying her carefully in the bright morning light. "Should you ever require assistance, of any nature, I would consider it a genuine privilege to offer whatever resources I possess." "That is a generous offer, Mr. Hale," Serafina replied, genuinely touched by his evident sincerity, "though I hope circumstances will not require me to accept it." Julian smiled faintly, mounting his recovered horse with practiced ease. "Nonetheless, my lady, The offer remains genuine, should circumstances ever change. Before guiding his horse forward, he paused a moment longer, reaching into his coat and retrieving a small folded card, which he handed down to her carefully. Should you ever find yourself in the city, or in need of assistance sooner than expected, this will help you find me. I do not offer it lightly, my lady. Few people outside my own trading partners possess it. Serafina accepted the card, studying the neat, precise handwriting, listing an address near the city's merchant district. I shall keep it safely, she said, genuinely touched by the gesture. Thank you again, Mr. Hale, for everything. It is I who remains grateful, Julian replied. Not merely for shelter from the storm, but for the reminder that genuine effort and honest character still exist in this world, even in places others have long since abandoned as worthless. He offered a final, respectful nod. Safe fortunes to you, my lady, and to this house you are so determinedly rebuilding. With that, he guided his horse carefully down the estate's winding drive, disappearing eventually beyond the tree line, leaving Serafina standing thoughtfully upon the front steps, watching his departure with quiet, unexpected curiosity regarding whatever future encounters fate might yet have planned between them. She remained there a long while after he had gone, turning the small card over slowly between her fingers, listening to the distant birdsong that had returned now that the storm had fully passed. Behind her, the sounds of the household stirring back into their usual morning routine drifted faintly through the newly repaired windows, familiar and steady, a reminder of everything she had already built here, regardless of whatever unexpected visitors passed briefly through her life. Wendell joined her eventually on the steps, watching the empty drive where Julian had disappeared only moments before. Well, he said gruffly, though something less suspicious now colored his weathered tone. He seemed genuine enough, in the end. Whatever caution I felt last evening, I confess, it has eased somewhat this morning. Perhaps, Serafina agreed, tucking the small card carefully into her dress pocket, alongside the mysterious scrap of blue fabric. Though I do not believe we have seen the last of either mystery just yet, Wendell. The fabric, and whoever it belongs to, remains unresolved. And something tells me Mr. Hale may yet prove more significant to our circumstances than a single stormy evening's chance encounter. Wendell studied her carefully, a knowing, weathered smile briefly touching his features. You may be right on both counts, my lady. Time, as always, will tell us soon enough. As the morning sun continued climbing steadily higher above Blackthorn Hollow's newly repaired rooftops, Serafina turned back toward the house, her thoughts already shifting toward the day's remaining work, though a small, quiet part of her lingered still upon the unexpected warmth of the previous evening's conversation, and the unusual sense of possibility it had left behind. A carriage bearing the unmistakable crest of a noble household rolled unexpectedly through Blackthorn Hollow's front gates, and Serafina felt her stomach tighten with sudden apprehension as she watched it approach from an upstairs window. She had not been expecting visitors, certainly not ones bearing formal crests, and her mind raced immediately toward troubling possibilities. Had the Duke sent someone to check on her circumstances directly? Had news of her progress reached ears she had hoped might remain ignorant a while longer? My lady, Ivy called urgently from the base of the stairs. There is a carriage arriving, quite grand by the look of it. Serafina hurried downstairs, smoothing her simple but presentable dress as best she could, arriving in the entrance hall just as the carriage came to a full stop before the front steps. A liveried footman descended quickly to open the carriage door, and a moment later, an elegantly dressed older woman emerged, studying the estate's exterior with obvious, undisguised surprise. "Goodness!" the woman said, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "I confess, I did not entirely believe the rumors reaching the city, but it seems they were, if anything, understated." Serafina stepped forward cautiously, offering a polite curtsy despite her uncertainty regarding the visitor's identity and purpose. "Good afternoon. I am Serafina Ashworth. May I ask who I have the pleasure of receiving?" "Lady Winifred Ashcombe," the woman replied, studying Serafina with sharp, curious eyes. "I was traveling through the region visiting distant relations when I heard considerable talk regarding a young woman restoring this very estate. I confess curiosity got the better of my itinerary, and I decided to see the truth of it myself." Relief flooded through Serafina, quickly followed by cautious optimism. This was no representative of the Duke, no threat sent to undermine her progress. simply a curious noblewoman, drawn by traveling gossip. You are most welcome, Lady Ashcombe. Please, come inside, and allow me to show you what we have accomplished thus far. As Serafina guided her unexpected guest through the newly restored conservatory, the repaired dining hall, and the carefully tended gardens now showing genuine signs of renewed life, Lady Ashcombe's initial curiosity steadily transformed into genuine, evident admiration. "This is remarkable," the older woman said, running her gloved fingers gently along the conservatory's newly repaired glass panels. "I have seen far wealthier households neglect their properties considerably worse than this one had fallen, my dear. Whatever circumstances brought you here, you have clearly accomplished something few would have believed possible." "Thank you, Lady Ashcombe," Serafina said, genuine pride evident beneath her careful modesty. "It has required considerable effort from many dedicated hands, though I confess, the results have exceeded even my own expectations." Lady Ashcombe studied her thoughtfully for a long moment, something calculating yet not unkind flickering behind her sharp eyes. "Might I ask, my dear, precisely what circumstances brought you to Blackthorn Hollow in the first place? Forgive my directness, but curiosity, as I mentioned, tends to overcome my better manners rather easily." Serafina hesitated only briefly, before deciding, once again, that honesty served her circumstances better than careful evasion. She explained, calmly and without exaggeration, the scandal that had never truly been hers, the unjust blame placed upon her shoulders, and the Duke's cold decision to exile her to this forgotten estate. Lady Ashcombe listened carefully throughout, her expression gradually shifting from curiosity toward something considerably more sympathetic. "I confess, my dear, I have heard whispers of that particular scandal circulating through the city, though the details reaching my ears differed considerably from what you have just described. It would not surprise me in the slightest to learn the truth had been deliberately obscured to protect certain reputations." "You believe me, then?" Serafina asked, genuine hope flickering, despite her efforts to remain cautiously composed. "I believe what I have witnessed here today, far more convincingly than any drawing-room gossip," Lady Ashcombe replied firmly. "A young woman capable of transforming genuine ruin into something this remarkable, entirely through her own determination and character, hardly strikes me as someone capable of the reckless scandal I heard whispered about in the city." Serafina felt something warm and unfamiliar rising within her chest at the older woman's genuine belief. A small but significant validation, after weeks of carrying her unjust exile largely alone. "Thank you, Lady Ashcombe. Your words mean more than you likely realize." Before departing later that afternoon, Lady Ashcombe made a request that caught Serafina entirely by surprise.
"I intend to return next month, my dear, and I would very much like to bring several acquaintances along with me, if you would permit it."
"I believe many within my circle would benefit considerably from witnessing firsthand what genuine effort and character can accomplish, rather than merely inherited privilege." Serafina considered the request carefully, recognizing both opportunity and risk within it. Hosting members of the nobility, even informally, meant exposing herself and her progress to wider scrutiny, potentially reaching ears connected to the Duke's own circle. Yet it also represented a genuine chance to reshape the narrative surrounding her exile, to prove, publicly and undeniably, exactly how mistaken the Duke's judgment had been. "I would be honored to host you and your acquaintances, Lady Ashcombe," she said finally, her voice steady, despite the uncertainty churning beneath her composed exterior. True to her word, Lady Ashcombe returned nearly a month later, this time accompanied by 3 additional carriages, carrying a small but genuinely curious group of minor nobility and wealthy gentry from the surrounding region. Serafina, having spent the intervening weeks preparing carefully alongside her devoted household, greeted her guests with a confidence that surprised even herself. The gathering, modest by the standards of grand city entertainments, nonetheless represented something Serafina had not dared imagine possible only months earlier. Guests wandered admiringly through the newly restored conservatory, praised the carefully tended gardens now blooming steadily despite the approaching autumn chill, and shared genuine, animated conversation over the simple but expertly prepared meal Mrs. Marsh and Ivy had arranged. "I confess, Lady Ashworth," one gentleman remarked, studying the estate's transformed exterior with evident fascination, "I had heard this property described as beyond hope entirely. Seeing it now, I struggle to reconcile that description with what stands before me. Ruin, I have learned, is rarely as permanent as it first appears, Serafina replied, genuine confidence steadying her voice. Given sufficient determination, and the right people willing to invest their effort, even the most forgotten places can find their way toward renewal. Her words seemed to resonate deeply among the gathered guests, several of whom lingered afterward, engaging her in genuine, thoughtful conversation regarding the restoration efforts and the philosophy guiding them. By evening's end, as the visiting carriages finally departed back toward the city, Serafina felt something profound shifting within her circumstances. A quiet but undeniable transformation from forgotten exile toward someone whose name people had genuinely begun to remember and admire. Amid the pleasant conversation and admiring wanderings of that first gathering, a folded letter arrived by private courier, just as the visiting carriages were preparing their departure, addressed specifically to Serafina in familiar, neat handwriting. She recognized it immediately as belonging to Julian Hale, and found herself stepping briefly away from her departing guests to read it in quiet privacy near the conservatory entrance. The letter, brief but warmly written, expressed genuine pleasure at hearing news of her continued success, evidently reaching him through his own extensive trading connections throughout the region. He inquired politely after her well-being, mentioned business that might soon bring him traveling nearby again, and closed with a simple, sincere hope that circumstances might allow their paths to cross once more, before winter fully settled across the countryside. Serafina folded the letter carefully, a small, genuine smile touching her lips, despite the whirlwind of the afternoon's activities. She had thought of him more frequently than she cared to fully admit, since his unexpected departure weeks earlier, and something about receiving this simple, thoughtful correspondence settled warmly within her chest. She tucked the letter safely into her dress pocket, alongside the small card he had given her before departing, and returned her attention to her remaining guests, though a small, private happiness lingered quietly beneath her composed exterior for the remainder of the afternoon. Not every reaction to Blackthorn Hollow's growing reputation proved entirely welcoming, however. Among the guests attending a later gathering held several weeks after Lady Ashcombe's initial visit, Serafina noticed a young woman standing somewhat apart from the others, observing the estate's transformation with an expression considerably more calculating than admiring. "Forgive my asking," Serafina said, approaching the woman directly, recognizing genuine value in addressing potential concerns openly, rather than allowing them to fester unaddressed. "But I do not believe we have been properly introduced." The woman turned toward her, offering a smile that did not entirely reach her sharp, assessing eyes. "Lady Constance Vale," she said smoothly. "I confess I attended today largely out of curiosity, having heard considerable talk regarding your remarkable efforts here. I must say, the rumors, if anything, understated the transformation." Something in the woman's carefully measured tone struck Serafina as slightly too polished, too rehearsed, though she could not immediately identify precisely what unsettled her about the encounter. "Thank you, Lady Vale. I hope you have found the gathering enjoyable." "Quite enjoyable indeed," Constance replied, her gaze drifting deliberately across the restored conservatory, before returning to study Serafina with renewed, careful attention. "Though I confess, I find myself rather curious regarding the particular circumstances that first brought you to this estate. Such details rarely travel through proper channels intact, do they?" Serafina felt a small, cautious chill settle beneath her composed exterior, recognizing something deliberately probing within the other woman's seemingly innocent curiosity. "Circumstances that matter very little now, I should think, given what has been accomplished here since." "Of course," Constance agreed smoothly, though her sharp eyes suggested she remained far from satisfied by the deliberately vague response. "Still, I do enjoy understanding the full story behind such remarkable transformations. Perhaps we shall have opportunity to discuss it further, in time." The exchange left Serafina feeling distinctly unsettled long after Constance had departed with the rest of the afternoon's guests, though she could not immediately articulate precisely why. Something about the woman's careful, probing questions, combined with her evidently keen interest in the specific circumstances surrounding Serafina's exile, suggested motivations considerably more complicated than simple social curiosity. That evening, discussing the day's events with Mrs. Marsh over their usual quiet supper, Serafina mentioned her uneasy encounter with Lady Constance Vale. Vale, Mrs. Marsh repeated thoughtfully, setting down her spoon as memory stirred behind her weathered features. I believe I have heard that name mentioned before, my lady, though I cannot immediately recall the specific context. It shall come to me eventually, given time. Something about her troubled me considerably, Serafina admitted. Her questions felt deliberately pointed, as though she sought something specific rather than simple polite conversation. Perhaps mere jealousy, Mrs. Marsh suggested, though her tone carried evident uncertainty. Your success here has become considerably remarked upon throughout the region, my lady. Not everyone receives such news with genuine admiration. Some, I fear, may resent it considerably instead. Serafina considered this possibility carefully, though something within her instinct suggested Constance's interest ran deeper than simple resentment or jealousy. Whatever the true nature of the woman's curiosity, Serafina resolved to remain cautiously vigilant regarding any future encounters between them. Word of the successful gathering spread quickly through the region, following the visit, carried enthusiastically by guests, eager to share their genuine surprise and admiration with friends and acquaintances who had not yet witnessed Blackthorn Hollow's transformation firsthand. Within weeks, additional visitors began arriving, some announced formally through proper correspondence, others simply curious travelers, drawn by increasingly widespread rumors of the remarkable restoration occurring at the once-forgotten estate. Serafina, recognizing the genuine opportunity unfolding before her, began hosting small, carefully arranged gatherings on a semi-regular basis, each one further cementing Blackthorn Hollow's growing reputation as something far more significant than simple abandoned ruin. Her household, initially assembled through necessity and shared circumstance, found themselves increasingly proud participants in something genuinely remarkable, their combined efforts creating not merely a restored building, but a place people genuinely wished to visit, to experience, to remember. Yet even as her reputation continued growing steadily throughout the surrounding region, Serafina remained cautiously aware that such visibility carried genuine risk alongside its evident rewards. Word traveled quickly through noble circles, and she understood clearly that eventually, inevitably, news of her remarkable transformation would reach ears connected directly to the Duke himself, ears that might not receive such news with the same genuine admiration as Lady Ashcombe and her curious acquaintances had shown. Amid this growing wave of attention, Julian himself returned briefly to Blackthorn Hollow, his promised business bringing him genuinely through the region rather than serving merely as convenient excuse. He arrived on a clear, crisp afternoon, dressed considerably more presentably than during his storm-drenched first visit, and Serafina found herself genuinely pleased at the sight of his familiar, welcome presence approaching along the estate's now well-maintained drive. "You have accomplished remarkable things since I last visited," he observed, studying the transformed grounds with evident admiration as she greeted him near the front steps. "I confess, my lady, the rumors reaching me through various trading connections scarcely captured the full scope of what you have built here." "We have worked considerably hard these past months," Serafina admitted, unable to entirely suppress the genuine pride evident within her voice. "Though I confess, receiving your letter some weeks past brought considerable encouragement during particularly demanding days." Julian's expression softened noticeably at her admission. "I am glad it reached you then. I confess, I thought of you rather more frequently than perhaps proper distance between recent acquaintances typically allows." They spent that afternoon walking together through the restored gardens, conversation flowing easily between them regarding both the ongoing restoration efforts and matters considerably more personal. Julian shared additional details regarding his own difficult beginnings, the years of determined effort required to establish his current standing, while Serafina found herself, gradually and with growing comfort, sharing fuller details regarding the scandal that had first brought her to this forgotten estate. "The Duke's judgment strikes me as considerably hasty," Julian observed, genuine indignation coloring his measured tone, as she finished recounting the unjust circumstances of her exile. "To cast aside someone of evident character and capability, based merely upon convenient rumor rather than genuine investigation, speaks poorly of his judgment rather than your own conduct." "Perhaps," Serafina agreed quietly. "Though I confess, whatever his original intentions, I find myself increasingly grateful for the circumstances that eventually led me here, difficult as their beginning may have been." Before departing later that evening, Julian mentioned, somewhat carefully, having encountered mention of a certain Lady Constance Vale, during recent business dealings within the city. I do not know her personally, he admitted, though I recall hearing her name mentioned in connection with considerable financial difficulty within her own family's circumstances. Perhaps entirely unrelated to your own situation, my lady, though I thought it worth mentioning, given your earlier unease regarding her visit. The information settled thoughtfully within Serafina's mind long after Julian's departure, adding another curious piece to the still unclear puzzle surrounding Constance's probing questions and evident interest in her circumstances. Financial difficulty, she considered carefully, might provide genuine motivation for someone seeking to undermine her growing success, particularly if that success somehow threatened resources or arrangements benefiting Constance's own troubled circumstances. She did not yet possess sufficient understanding to draw firm conclusions, but she resolved, quietly and determinedly, to remain considerably more vigilant regarding any future dealings with Lady Constance Vale. She did not yet know precisely when that reckoning would arrive, nor exactly how the Duke would respond upon discovering that the young woman he had exiled to disappear quietly had instead transformed her forgotten prison into something the entire region had begun genuinely celebrating. But as autumn deepened steadily into the promise of approaching winter, Serafina found herself preparing carefully, in whatever ways she could, for whatever reckoning still lay ahead. A second unannounced carriage arrived at Blackthorn Hollow's gates barely a week later, and this time, Serafina recognized the crest immediately, her stomach tightening with instant, wary recognition. Lady Constance Vale stepped down from the carriage alone, dressed in fine traveling clothes that suggested considerable effort had gone into appearing effortlessly elegant, her sharp eyes immediately sweeping across the estate's transformed exterior, with an expression carefully composed to mask whatever calculation lay beneath it. "Lady Ashworth," Constance said smoothly, offering a polite curtsy, as Serafina emerged cautiously from the front entrance to greet her uninvited guest. "I confess, I found myself traveling nearby once again, and simply could not resist another opportunity to witness your remarkable progress firsthand." "Lady Vale," Serafina replied evenly, careful to keep her tone politely neutral, despite the wariness settling steadily beneath her composed exterior. "You are welcome, of course, though I confess, I did not expect another visit quite so soon." "Curiosity, I fear, rarely respects convenient timing," Constance said, her smile remaining fixed and pleasant, even as her sharp eyes continued studying Serafina with evident, calculating interest. "I do hope you will forgive my rather sudden arrival." Serafina guided her unexpected guest through the estate's grounds, with practiced, careful hospitality, though she remained deliberately vague regarding specific details Constance seemed particularly eager to uncover. Throughout their walk, Constance asked pointed questions regarding the exact nature of Serafina's arrangement with the Duke, the precise terms of her exile, and whether any formal documentation existed confirming her rights to remain at Blackthorn Hollow indefinitely. "Forgive my directness," Constance said eventually, as they paused near the newly restored conservatory, "but I confess genuine curiosity regarding your legal standing here. Surely the Duke retains ultimate authority over this property, given it remains formally part of his estate holdings. Should he decide, for whatever reason, to reconsider his current arrangement, what protection would you truly possess against such reversal?" The question struck uncomfortably close to concerns Serafina had privately harbored herself, though she had not previously voiced them aloud to anyone within her household. "I possess the Duke's explicit instruction that I reside here," she replied carefully. "Whatever his original intentions regarding my presence, I do not believe he anticipated, nor would he easily reverse, the genuine value this restoration has created." "Value, perhaps," Constance said, something subtly sharp flickering briefly behind her carefully composed expression, though value alone rarely guarantees security, particularly for those without formal legal standing to protect their position. "I merely raised the question out of genuine concern for your circumstances, Lady Ashworth, nothing more." Despite Constance's evidently innocent framing, Serafina recognized something considerably more calculated beneath the surface of her pointed questions. Whatever the woman's true motivations, she seemed genuinely invested in understanding precisely how vulnerable Serafina's position remained, information that could easily prove valuable to someone seeking to undermine her efforts. Following Constance's departure later that afternoon, Serafina immediately sought out Wendell, sharing her growing unease regarding the visitor's persistent, pointed curiosity. She asked considerably specific questions regarding my legal standing here, she explained. Questions that suggest genuine interest in identifying precisely how vulnerable my position might be. Wendell's weathered features tightened with evident concern. I do not like this, my lady. Combined with the earlier sabotage, and now this woman's pointed inquiries regarding your legal vulnerability, I begin to suspect these circumstances may be considerably more connected than mere coincidence. You believe Constance responsible for the earlier sabotage? Serafina asked, the possibility settling uncomfortably within her chest, even as pieces began arranging themselves toward troubling clarity. I cannot say with certainty, Wendell admitted, though the timing and nature of her questions today strike me as considerably suspicious, given everything we have already experienced these past months. That evening, gathering her household together, as had become her practice whenever significant developments arose, Serafina shared her growing concerns regarding Lady Constance Vale's suspicious behavior and pointed questions. The household listened carefully, several faces reflecting the same troubled unease Serafina herself felt regarding the mounting evidence, suggesting deliberate, calculated opposition to their continued success. Perhaps it is time, Margaret suggested carefully, to seek proper legal counsel regarding your formal standing here, my lady. If vulnerability truly exists within your current arrangement, addressing it directly would remove whatever leverage Lady Vale, or anyone else, might seek to exploit against you. Serafina considered the suggestion carefully, recognizing genuine wisdom within it, despite the additional expense and complication such action would require. You are entirely correct, Margaret. I have allowed myself to focus so completely upon rebuilding these physical walls that I neglected considering the legal foundation supporting my presence here at all. That oversight ends now. The following week, Serafina traveled to the nearest town possessing proper legal counsel, seeking guidance regarding her formal standing at Blackthorn Hollow, and whatever protections might exist to secure her continued residence, regardless of the Duke's potential future intentions. The solicitor she consulted, an experienced older man named Mr. Aldous Bramwell, listened carefully to her circumstances before offering measured, careful assessment. Your position, as you describe it, remains legally uncertain, he explained, studying the documentation Serafina had managed to gather regarding her exile. The Duke's instruction sending you here carries weight, certainly, but without formal written guarantee regarding your continued residence. He retains legal authority to reverse that arrangement whenever he chooses, for whatever reason he deems sufficient. Then what protection, if any, might I pursue? Serafina asked, genuine concern evident beneath her carefully composed exterior. Mr. Bramwell considered the question thoughtfully. Given sufficient documented evidence of genuine improvement to the property's value, combined with formal request for permanent transfer of ownership as compensation for your efforts, you might successfully petition for legal standing, considerably stronger than your current uncertain arrangement. Such petitions require considerable evidence and patience, however, and success remains far from guaranteed. Serafina left the consultation with renewed determination, resolving to document carefully every improvement made to Blackthorn Hollow, every measure of genuine value her efforts had created, building toward eventual formal petition for permanent ownership, rather than remaining vulnerable to the Duke's potential future reconsideration. During her visit to Mr. Bramwell's office, Serafina had also taken the opportunity to write to Julian, explaining her growing suspicions regarding Lady Constance Vale, and requesting whatever further information his trading connections might uncover regarding the woman's circumstances and possible motivations. His reply arrived within days, considerably more detailed than his earlier brief mention of Constance's financial difficulties. According to Julian's careful inquiries, the Vale family's fortunes had declined steadily over recent years, following several poor investments and mounting debts that threatened their standing within noble circles considerably. More significantly, Julian's letter revealed that Constance's family maintained close connections with a prominent solicitor within the Duke's own household staff, someone who might easily provide information regarding estate matters, including details surrounding Blackthorn Hollow's ownership and Serafina's uncertain legal standing there. The revelation settled uncomfortably within Serafina's chest, confirming suspicions she had not yet dared fully articulate even to herself. If Constance possessed connections capable of influencing the Duke's perception of circumstances at Blackthorn Hollow, her earlier probing questions regarding legal vulnerability took on considerably more sinister implications than simple idle curiosity. Sharing this information with Wendell and Peter that evening, Serafina watched their expressions grow increasingly troubled as the pieces continued arranging themselves toward uncomfortable clarity. "If she maintains connections within the Duke's household," Peter said slowly, "then whatever sabotage occurred here previously may have been merely preliminary. Should direct interference prove insufficient, she might instead seek to convince the Duke himself to reverse his arrangement entirely, removing you from Blackthorn Hollow through official means rather than continued covert sabotage." The possibility chilled Serafina considerably, recognizing genuine formidable threat within such a strategy. Unlike scattered glass or weakened roof supports, formal reversal of the Duke's original arrangement would prove considerably more difficult to resist or counter, particularly given her currently uncertain legal standing. "Then we must move more quickly, securing proper legal protection," she said finally, determination steadying her voice despite the genuine concern churning beneath it. Mr. Bramwell suggested documenting the estate's improved value thoroughly, building toward formal petition for permanent ownership. "I believe we can no longer afford to proceed with anything less than complete urgency." Over the following weeks, Serafina threw herself into this documentation effort with renewed determination, carefully recording every repair, every improvement, every measure of genuine value her household's collective efforts had created throughout Blackthorn Hollow. Peter and Silas provided detailed accounts of structural repairs completed, Margaret documented the garden's careful restoration, and Mrs. Marsh compiled thorough records regarding the estate's improved capacity for hosting guests and generating genuine local goodwill. Ivy, meanwhile, proved unexpectedly valuable during this period, having maintained casual friendships with several servants working within neighboring noble households, including, as it happened, one young maid, recently employed within circles, connected distantly to the Vale family's own household staff. "She mentioned something rather curious," Ivy reported one evening, having returned from visiting her friend in the nearby village. "Apparently, Lady Constance has been asking considerable questions regarding formal estate transfers, and how such matters might be arranged quickly, should circumstances require sudden action. My friend did not understand the full context, but given everything we already suspect, it seems rather telling." Serafina absorbed this additional piece of troubling information carefully, recognizing the mounting evidence, increasingly confirming her worst suspicions regarding Constance's true intentions. Whatever the woman ultimately hoped to achieve, she appeared to be moving with growing urgency toward some decisive action, likely intended to reclaim Blackthorn Hollow for her own family's benefit, before Serafina's improvements grew too significant, too publicly celebrated, to easily dismiss or reverse. "We must be prepared for whatever she intends," Serafina said firmly, addressing her gathered household with steady resolve, despite the genuine uncertainty surrounding exactly what form Constance's next move might take. "Whatever legal challenge or manipulation she attempts, we shall meet it with equal determination, and with the genuine truth of everything we have accomplished here standing firmly behind us." Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Serafina, Lady Constance Vale's own circumstances had grown considerably more desperate in recent weeks. Deep in debt, following her family's mounting financial difficulties, Constance had originally hoped Serafina's exile to Blackthorn Hollow might result in the estate's continued neglect, eventually allowing her own family, through carefully cultivated connections within the Duke's circle, to acquire the property cheaply, once it fell into complete, irreversible ruin. Serafina's unexpected, remarkable restoration efforts had thoroughly disrupted those carefully laid plans, transforming what Constance had hoped would remain worthless, abandoned property, into something increasingly valuable and increasingly celebrated throughout the region. Her earlier acts of sabotage, carefully disguised as accident or coincidence, had represented desperate attempts to slow or reverse Serafina's progress, before it threatened her family's carefully constructed financial scheme entirely. Now, with her sabotage attempts having failed to achieve their intended effect, Constance found herself forced toward increasingly desperate measures, her recent visit representing careful reconnaissance regarding precisely how vulnerable Serafina's legal position truly remained, information she intended to exploit through more direct, more dangerous methods if simple sabotage continued proving insufficient. Constance's original scheme had seemed simple enough when she first devised it nearly a year earlier. Her family's solicitor, a man named Mr. Percival Grant, who maintained close working relationships with several noble households including, crucially, connections within the Duke of Rothmere's own estate management, had first mentioned Blackthorn Hollow's abandoned status during a routine discussion regarding potential investment opportunities for families seeking to rebuild diminished fortunes. The property remains entirely neglected, Grant had explained during that initial conversation, and given sufficient patience, the Duke would likely accept a modest offer once the estate's continued deterioration makes clear its value has declined to nearly nothing. Properties abandoned long enough eventually become burdens their owners wish simply to be rid of, regardless of the price offered. Constance had recognized immediately the genuine opportunity within this information. Her family, despite their mounting financial difficulties, still possessed sufficient standing and modest remaining resources to eventually acquire Blackthorn Hollow cheaply, restore it gradually once secured, and re-establish their declining fortunes through the property's genuine, if currently hidden, value. The plan required only patience and continued neglect of the estate until circumstances aligned favorably for their eventual acquisition. Serafina's unexpected exile to Blackthorn Hollow, followed by her remarkably swift and effective restoration efforts, had thoroughly disrupted this carefully patient strategy. Rather than continued neglect driving down the property's perceived value, Serafina's determined efforts had instead begun rapidly increasing both its physical condition and its growing reputation throughout the region, threatening to eliminate entirely the very circumstances Constance's family had been quietly counting upon. "This cannot be allowed to continue," Constance had told Grant firmly, following her first troubling visit to witness Serafina's remarkable progress firsthand. "If this restoration continues unchecked, the Duke will recognize the property's renewed value long before we possess sufficient resources to make any reasonable offer for its acquisition. We must find some means of halting, or better yet, reversing this unwelcome development." It had been Grant himself who suggested the initial sabotage, believing subtle, deniable interference might sufficiently slow Serafina's progress without drawing obvious suspicion toward its true source. When that approach failed to achieve meaningful results, Constance had shifted toward more direct reconnaissance, seeking to understand precisely how vulnerable Serafina's legal standing remained, information that might prove valuable toward convincing the Duke directly that his current arrangement required urgent reconsideration. She began cultivating renewed connections within the Duke's own household, seeking opportunity to plant carefully calculated doubts regarding Serafina's continued presence at Blackthorn Hollow, hoping to convince the Duke himself that his ward's growing reputation and independence represented genuine threat to his own family's standing and authority, rather than the redemption story increasingly celebrated throughout the surrounding region. Through careful, patient cultivation of acquaintance with several members of the Duke's household staff, Constance eventually secured opportunity to speak briefly, seemingly by pure chance, with the Duke's own personal secretary during a social gathering within the city. She spoke carefully, planting subtle suggestions regarding troubling rumors of Serafina's growing independence, her increasingly public gatherings attracting considerable noble attention, and the potential embarrassment such visibility might eventually create for the Duke's own carefully protected reputation, the very reputation he had originally exiled Serafina specifically to protect. Surely, she suggested carefully, during that conversation, the Duke would wish to know that his ward, rather than remaining quietly forgotten as originally intended, has instead become the subject of considerable public discussion throughout noble circles. Such attention, however positively framed currently, carries genuine risk of eventually resurrecting the very scandal he sought so carefully to bury. The secretary, clearly intrigued by this carefully planted suggestion, promised to mention the matter discreetly to the Duke, precisely as Constance had hoped he would. Whether this seed of calculated doubt would grow into genuine action remained uncertain, but Constance felt confident that, given sufficient time and additional careful cultivation, she could eventually convince the Duke that reversing his current arrangement served his own interests considerably better than allowing Serafina's growing success to continue unchecked. Serafina, unaware of the full scope of Constance's desperate scheming, continued focusing her efforts on documenting the estate's genuine improvement and pursuing formal legal protection for her uncertain position. Yet even as she worked steadily toward securing her future, a persistent unease lingered beneath her determined resolve, an instinctive recognition that whatever conflict lay ahead with Lady Constance Vale had only just begun, and that far more significant challenges likely still awaited her before this particular battle reached its eventual conclusion. An invitation arrived from the city, addressed directly to Serafina, bearing a seal she recognized instantly, and her hands trembled slightly as she broke it open, uncertain whether it carried good news or the beginning of the reckoning she had long feared. The letter, however, contained nothing threatening at all. Instead, it came from a prominent society hostess Serafina had never personally met, requesting the honor of her presence at an upcoming gathering, specifically to discuss the remarkable restoration occurring at Blackthorn Hollow, which had apparently become something of a fashionable topic throughout the city's more discerning social circles. "They wish to hear from you directly," Mrs. Marsh observed, reading over Serafina's shoulder with evident satisfaction. "Not simply rumors, carried secondhand through returning guests, but your own account of everything accomplished here." Serafina considered the invitation carefully, recognizing both genuine opportunity and continued risk within accepting such visible public attention. Yet she had already committed herself, weeks earlier, to reshaping the narrative surrounding her exile, rather than hiding fearfully from continued scrutiny. Declining now would suggest weakness, or worse, guilt regarding circumstances she had done nothing wrong to create. "I shall accept," she decided finally. "Whatever risk this attention carries, I believe the greater risk lies in remaining silent and allowing others to control the story surrounding my circumstances." The gathering, held in a fashionable townhouse belonging to Lady Ashcombe's own extended social circle, proved considerably grander than anything Serafina had experienced since her original exile from the Duke's household. Elegant guests filled the spacious drawing room, many genuinely curious to hear firsthand the remarkable story circulating so persistently through their social circles regarding the once-abandoned estate now drawing such considerable attention. "Tell us," Lady Ashcombe encouraged warmly, having taken it upon herself to properly introduce Serafina to the assembled guests, "precisely how you managed such a remarkable transformation, starting from what everyone describes as complete, hopeless ruin." Serafina found herself speaking with growing confidence as the evening progressed, describing honestly the challenges she had faced upon first arriving at Blackthorn Hollow, the dedicated household she had gradually assembled through shared purpose rather than mere employment, and the careful, patient effort required to transform genuine ruin into something worth genuine celebration. "I did not possess considerable resources when I arrived," she explained candidly, "nor any particular expertise in restoration or estate management. What I possessed, simply, was determination, and the good fortune to encounter others, willing to invest their own effort and skill alongside mine, believing, as I did, that forgotten things deserve genuine chance at renewal." Her words resonated deeply among the gathered guests, several of whom pressed forward afterward with genuine questions and, increasingly, requests to visit Blackthorn Hollow personally to witness its remarkable transformation firsthand. By evening's end, Serafina had received no fewer than a dozen requests for future visits, along with genuine expressions of admiration from individuals whose social standing far exceeded anything she had previously imagined might take genuine interest in her circumstances. "You have accomplished something remarkable tonight," Lady Ashcombe observed privately as the gathering began winding toward its conclusion. "Not merely restoring a forgotten estate, my dear, but reshaping entirely how this city's more influential circles perceive your circumstances. Whatever scandal originally drove you from the Duke's household, I suspect it shall soon be entirely overshadowed by what you have built since." Among the guests attending that same city gathering, Serafina was genuinely delighted to discover Julian himself, having apparently received his own invitation through business connections maintained within the same social circle. He found her shortly after her initial address to the assembled guests, his expression carrying evident pride at witnessing her confident, articulate account of everything she had accomplished. "You spoke remarkably well," he said quietly, once they found a brief moment somewhat apart from the surrounding crowd. "I confess, my lady, Watching you address such an influential gathering with genuine confidence, I found myself considerably moved by how far you have come since that stormy evening we first met. I could not have accomplished any of it without the genuine support of those who chose to stand beside me, Serafina replied, meaning the words sincerely as she glanced toward him with quiet gratitude. Including, I might add, your own considerable assistance regarding certain troubling mysteries we have since partially unraveled. Julian smiled warmly at her acknowledgement. I have done little beyond offering what modest assistance I could, my lady. The genuine accomplishment remains entirely your own. They spent a considerable portion of the remaining evening together, conversation flowing easily between discussing the gathering's various guests and matters considerably more personal regarding their respective circumstances and growing mutual regard. Several other guests noticed their evident comfortable familiarity, and Serafina caught more than one curious, speculative glance directed toward them throughout the remainder of the evening. People will speak of us, I suspect, she observed quietly, noting yet another curious glance from a nearby cluster of guests. Let them speak, Julian replied, something warm and genuine flickering behind his steady gaze. I find myself, increasingly, rather unconcerned with what others might assume or speculate, so long as the truth of my genuine regard for you remains clear enough to yourself, my lady. Serafina felt her cheeks warm slightly at his candid admission, genuine happiness settling quietly beneath her otherwise composed exterior. Whatever challenges still awaited her regarding Constance's continued scheming, or the eventual reckoning with the Duke himself, she found considerable comfort in Julian's steady, genuine presence beside her throughout the evening's proceedings. Serafina returned to Blackthorn Hollow, buoyed by genuine optimism regarding the evening's success, though she remained cautiously aware that increased visibility carried corresponding increased risk regarding whatever scheme Constance continued quietly pursuing against her. Nonetheless, she resolved to embrace this growing attention fully, recognizing it as her most effective defense against whatever challenges still awaited her. Over the following weeks, Blackthorn Hollow experienced a genuine transformation in both reputation and practical circumstances. Visitors arrived with increasing regularity, some announced through proper correspondence, others simply curious travelers, drawn by widespread rumors of the remarkable estate now considered essential visiting for anyone touring the surrounding countryside. The estate's crooked front gates, once meant to keep out curious eyes from witnessing forgotten ruin, now welcomed a steady stream of admiring guests, eager to witness genuine restoration firsthand. Serafina, recognizing genuine opportunity within this growing attention, made the deliberate decision to fully restore the estate's grand front entrance, transforming what had once been crooked, rusted doors hanging precariously upon damaged hinges, into something genuinely magnificent, symbolizing precisely the transformation Blackthorn Hollow itself represented. Peter and Silas worked tirelessly alongside several additional craftsmen, recently hired using modest funds generated through Serafina's growing reputation, and several small but meaningful commissions from admiring visitors seeking her advice regarding their own restoration projects. The finished entrance, unveiled during a particularly well-attended autumn gathering, drew genuine gasps of admiration from assembled guests. Sturdy new doors, crafted from carefully selected oak and fitted with elegant iron hardware, replaced the broken, rusted originals entirely. The surrounding stonework, carefully cleaned and repaired, revealed intricate carved details that had remained hidden beneath decades of grime and neglect. Details that spoke to the estate's genuine historical significance, rather than simple abandoned ruin. This entrance alone tells the entire story, one particularly influential guest remarked, studying the transformed doorway with evident fascination. What was broken, forgotten, cast aside as worthless, restored through genuine determination into something truly worth celebrating. I confess, Lady Ashworth, I have rarely witnessed such a fitting symbol for the remarkable journey you have undertaken here. The evening of the entrance's unveiling carried genuine celebration throughout the household as well. Serafina, insisting that everyone who had contributed so tirelessly toward the estate's remarkable transformation share fully in the recognition their combined efforts had earned. Mrs. Marsh, normally reserved regarding public praise, found herself blinking back genuine tears as guests repeatedly praised the household's remarkable achievement throughout the evening. 20 years I tended these grounds virtually alone, she confided quietly to Serafina, during a brief pause in the evening's festivities, believing genuinely that no one would ever again care what became of this forgotten place. To witness this now, my lady, guests genuinely celebrating what we have built together, I confess it exceeds anything I ever dared imagine possible. You made this possible, Serafina replied warmly, taking the older woman's weathered hand gently within her own. Whatever recognition comes our way tonight, Mrs. Marsh, you deserve every measure of it, having preserved this house through years when no one else believed it worth saving. Wendell, too, received considerable genuine praise throughout the evening, several visiting gentlemen expressing particular admiration regarding the structural repairs he had overseen so carefully throughout the estate's various vulnerable sections. Peter and Silas found themselves fielding numerous inquiries regarding potential future commissions, their skilled craftsmanship having drawn considerable favorable attention among guests who owned their own properties, requiring similar careful restoration. Amid the general celebration, however, Serafina noticed with sudden unease that Lady Constance Vale had arrived among the evening's guests, uninvited, but evidently unwilling to miss witnessing the entrance's celebrated unveiling firsthand. Constance moved through the crowd with practiced, elegant ease, offering polite compliments regarding the transformation, while her sharp eyes continued their familiar, calculating assessment of everything surrounding her. Quite the achievement, Constance remarked, approaching Serafina directly, once opportunity presented itself amid the evening's festivities. I confess, Lady Ashworth, I did not truly believe you capable of such considerable transformation when we first became acquainted. You have proven me rather thoroughly mistaken. Thank you, Lady Vale, Serafina replied carefully, recognizing genuine tension lurking beneath the other woman's outwardly gracious words. I hope you are enjoying this evening's celebration. Immensely, Constance said, her smile remaining fixed and pleasant, despite the calculating sharpness never fully leaving her watchful eyes. Though I confess, such visible success carries its own particular risks, does it not? The more attention one draws, the more scrutiny inevitably follows regarding the circumstances that first created such opportunity. I do hope, for your sake, that scrutiny reveals nothing you would prefer remained quietly forgotten. The thinly veiled threat settled uncomfortably within Serafina's chest, though she refused to allow Constance the satisfaction of witnessing genuine unease cross her carefully composed expression. I have nothing to fear from scrutiny, Lady Vale, she replied evenly. Whatever circumstances first brought me here, I have built something entirely genuine since, something that speaks considerably louder than whatever rumors or scrutiny might follow. Constance studied her for a long, calculating moment, before offering a final, tight smile. We shall see, Lady Ashworth. We shall certainly see. With that, she withdrew back into the surrounding crowd of celebrating guests, leaving Serafina standing quietly troubled amid the evening's otherwise genuine celebration. Julian, who had witnessed the exchange from a short distance away, approached quickly once Constance had departed, his expression carrying evident concern. What did she want? He asked quietly. Merely to remind me that success carries its own particular vulnerabilities, Serafina replied, forcing her voice to remain steady, despite the lingering unease Constance's veiled threat had created. I believe she grows increasingly desperate, Julian, and desperate people often become considerably more dangerous as their options continue narrowing. Then we shall simply have to ensure your position remains considerably stronger than whatever scheme she continues pursuing, Julian replied firmly, genuine determination evident within his steady gaze. Whatever she intends, my lady, I do not believe you face it alone. Despite the unsettling encounter, Serafina refused to allow Constance's veiled threat to overshadow the genuine celebration surrounding Blackthorn Hollow's magnificent transformation. She returned to her guests with renewed composure, determined to enjoy fully the recognition her household's combined efforts had genuinely earned, even as quiet unease regarding Constance's next move continued lingering beneath her otherwise confident exterior. Word of the magnificent restored entrance spread quickly throughout the region, further cementing Blackthorn Hollow's growing reputation as something genuinely worth experiencing firsthand. Increasingly, invitations to visit the estate became something actively sought after among the region's more fashionable social circles, transforming what had once been considered a cursed, forgotten ruin into precisely the opposite, a genuinely celebrated destination that everyone, it seemed, wished to experience for themselves. Serafina found herself increasingly overwhelmed, in the most positive sense, by the sheer volume of interest her restoration efforts had generated. Where once she had worried desperately about simply surviving her unjust exile, she now found herself managing a genuinely thriving household, increasingly recognized throughout the region, for precisely the qualities the Duke had originally believed her incapable of demonstrating: determination, genuine character, and the capacity to transform even the most seemingly hopeless circumstances into something worth genuine celebration. Yet amid this genuine success, Serafina remained cautiously aware that such visibility inevitably carried her story back toward the very circles she had originally been exiled to escape. She understood clearly that eventually, inevitably, news of her remarkable transformation would reach the Duke himself, whether through Constance's careful scheming or simply through the natural spread of increasingly widespread rumor and admiration. She did not know precisely how the Duke would respond upon eventually learning that the young woman he had exiled specifically to disappear had instead become the very subject of considerable admiration and attention he had originally hoped to avoid entirely. But as Blackthorn Hollow's reputation continued growing steadily throughout the surrounding region, drawing increasing numbers of admiring visitors through its magnificently restored front entrance, Serafina found herself preparing, quietly but determinedly, for whatever confrontation still awaited her. In the quiet hours following each successful gathering, once guests had departed and her household had retired for the evening, Serafina often found herself standing alone before the magnificent restored entrance, running her fingers thoughtfully along the carved stonework that had once lain hidden beneath decades of grime and neglect. There was something deeply satisfying in witnessing such tangible proof of transformation, proof that things cast aside as worthless could, given sufficient determination and genuine care, become something worth genuine celebration once again. She thought often, during these quiet moments, of the frightened young woman who had first arrived at these very gates months earlier, uncertain and grieving everything she had lost, believing herself forgotten and discarded by everyone who mattered. That woman felt increasingly distant now, replaced gradually by someone considerably more confident, someone who had learned that her own worth need not depend entirely upon the judgment of those who had once held power over her circumstances. Yet she remained equally aware that Constance's veiled threats, and whatever scheme continued unfolding within the Duke's own household regarding her growing reputation, represented genuine, unresolved danger still lurking beneath her hard-won success. Whatever satisfaction she found in Blackthorn Hollow's remarkable transformation, she understood clearly that the true test of everything she had built still lay ahead, waiting patiently for the moment when the Duke himself would finally learn precisely how thoroughly his original judgment regarding her had been proven mistaken. That confrontation, though she did not yet know it, was considerably closer than she realized. A carriage bearing the unmistakable crest of the Duke of Rothmere rolled through Blackthorn Hollow's magnificent front gates without any prior warning, and Serafina felt her heart lurch violently the moment she recognized it from her upstairs window. She had known this moment would eventually arrive, had spent considerable weeks preparing herself mentally for whatever confrontation the Duke's eventual discovery of her success might bring. Yet actually witnessing his carriage approach, without any advance notice whatsoever, left her considerably more unsettled than she had anticipated feeling. "My lady," Ivy called urgently, having spotted the approaching carriage from the entrance hall. "It bears the Duke's own crest." "Shall I?" "I shall receive him myself," Serafina interrupted, forcing steadiness into her voice, despite the anxiety churning beneath her composed exterior. She smoothed her dress carefully and descended the stairs with measured, deliberate calm, determined not to allow the Duke witness any trace of the nervousness threatening to overwhelm her. By the time she reached the entrance hall, the Duke himself had already stepped down from his carriage, studying the estate's transformed exterior with an expression Serafina could not immediately read, somewhere between genuine surprise and carefully guarded skepticism. He looked older than she remembered, though barely half a year had passed since her exile, his features carrying evident signs of considerable stress and financial worry she had not previously witnessed during her years within his household. "Your Grace," she said, offering a formal curtsy as he entered the entrance hall, her voice carefully composed, despite the genuine uncertainty churning beneath it. I confess, I did not expect your visit. Nor did I expect to find this, the Duke replied, his sharp gaze sweeping across the meticulously restored entrance hall, the polished staircase, the carefully maintained portraits now cleaned of decades of accumulated dust. I was informed, through various sources reaching my household these past weeks, that Blackthorn Hollow had undergone considerable improvement. I confess, having witnessed it myself now, the reports considerably understated the reality. Serafina studied him carefully, uncertain whether his evident surprise carried genuine admiration or troubled concern regarding whatever implications her success might create for his own circumstances. We have worked considerably hard these past months, Your Grace, restoring what had fallen into genuine ruin. So it would seem, the Duke said, his tone remaining carefully neutral, despite the evident astonishment still visible within his sharp, assessing gaze. Might I ask what precisely inspired such considerable effort, given that I sent you here specifically believing this estate, and your presence within it, would remain quietly forgotten? The question carried genuine weight, and Serafina considered her response carefully before answering. I refuse to accept that being forgotten meant being worthless, Your Grace. This estate, much like myself, had simply been cast aside by those unwilling to invest the effort required to see its genuine potential. I chose, instead, to prove that judgment mistaken. The Duke studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment, something complicated flickering behind his sharp, tired eyes. You have accomplished something considerably more remarkable than I anticipated when I sent you here, he admitted finally, though his tone carried evident reluctance regarding the acknowledgement. I confess, considerable rumor has reached my own household regarding your growing reputation and the increasing attention Blackthorn Hollow has attracted throughout the region. Rumor that troubles you, Your Grace? Serafina asked carefully, recognizing genuine tension beneath his measured words. The Duke hesitated, clearly weighing his response carefully. I sent you here originally to protect my family's reputation from scandal. I believed your continued presence within my household would inevitably worsen. Your growing visibility now, however positively framed currently, carries risk of eventually drawing renewed attention toward circumstances I had hoped would remain permanently forgotten. Serafina felt a cold certainty settle within her chest, recognizing exactly the concern she had long feared might eventually motivate the Duke's reconsideration of her circumstances. Your Grace, I have done nothing throughout my time here, beyond honest, dedicated effort toward restoring an abandoned property. Whatever attention that effort has attracted, it reflects positively upon your own family's holdings, not negatively. Perhaps, the Duke acknowledged, though his tone remained carefully guarded. Yet I have also received recent correspondence suggesting your continued visibility might eventually resurrect uncomfortable questions regarding the original circumstances of your departure from my household. Questions I would very much prefer remain permanently buried. Serafina immediately recognized the likely source of such carefully planted concern, her suspicions regarding Constance's continued scheming crystallizing into uncomfortable certainty. Might I ask, Your Grace, precisely who provided such correspondence, expressing these particular concerns? The Duke hesitated, clearly reluctant to reveal his sources directly. The specific origin matters less than the legitimate concern it raises, Lady Ashworth. I must consider carefully whether your continued presence here, however successful your restoration efforts have proven, ultimately serves my family's genuine interests. The implication hung heavy and threatening within the air between them, and Serafina felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to waver, despite her determined efforts to remain steady. Everything she had built these past months, every genuine relationship, every hard-won improvement, suddenly felt precariously vulnerable to a single decision the Duke might make, based on carefully manipulated concerns, rather than genuine understanding of everything she had actually accomplished. Your Grace, she said, forcing steadiness back into her voice through sheer determined effort, I would ask that you consider the genuine evidence before you, rather than whatever carefully framed concerns have reached you through correspondence, whose true motivations you have not yet fully investigated. This estate stands transformed through honest effort. The reputation I have built reflects genuine character, not reckless scandal. I would ask respectfully that you judge my circumstances based on what genuinely exists here, rather than manipulated fears regarding what might theoretically occur. The Duke studied her carefully, for a long, weighted moment, something shifting slowly behind his tired, calculating eyes. You speak with considerable confidence, Lady Ashworth. Confidence I confess I did not previously associate with the quiet, uncertain ward who once resided within my household. Circumstances change people, Your Grace, Seraphina replied simply. Being cast aside, forced to rebuild something from genuine ruin, through my own effort and determination, has taught me considerably more, regarding my own genuine worth, than years spent quietly uncertain within your household ever did. The Duke remained silent for several long moments, his gaze traveling slowly around the transformed entrance hall once more, seemingly weighing carefully everything he had witnessed against whatever concerns had originally motivated his sudden, unannounced visit. Finally, he spoke again, his tone carrying something considerably less certain than his earlier guarded caution. I confess, Lady Ashworth, I did not anticipate this particular outcome when I sent you here. I believed genuinely that Blackthorn Hollow represented convenient means of removing an inconvenient problem from my immediate concern. Instead, I find myself confronting evidence, suggesting I perhaps misjudged your character, rather more significantly than I previously realized. Then might I hope, Your Grace, that you will judge my continued circumstances based on that reconsidered understanding, rather than whatever manipulated concerns first prompted your visit today? Seraphina asked, allowing genuine hope to color her carefully measured words. The Duke did not answer immediately, instead studying her with an expression that suggested considerable internal conflict between his original intentions and the undeniable evidence of genuine achievement surrounding him. I require time to consider matters carefully, he said finally. I shall not make hasty decisions regarding your circumstances today, Lady Ashworth. Though I confess, I can no longer dismiss what you have accomplished here as easily as I might have believed possible before witnessing it directly. With that, the Duke departed as unexpectedly as he had arrived, leaving Seraphina standing uncertainly within her transformed entrance hall, genuine hope and lingering anxiety warring uneasily beneath her carefully composed exterior. The moment his carriage disappeared beyond the tree line, Seraphina's careful composure finally cracked, and she found herself sinking slowly onto the bottom step of the newly restored staircase, her hands trembling as the full weight of the confrontation settled upon her at last. Mrs. Marsh, who had been watching anxiously from a nearby doorway throughout the entire exchange, hurried forward immediately, settling beside her with quiet, steady concern. You handled that with considerable courage, my lady, the old woman said gently, taking Seraphina's trembling hands within her own weathered grip. I confess I feared the worst when I saw his carriage approaching, yet you stood your ground admirably. He did not refuse me outright, Seraphina said quietly, though uncertainty still colored her voice considerably. But neither did he offer any genuine assurance regarding my continued circumstances here. Whatever concerns Constance has planted within his household, they clearly carry sufficient weight to genuinely trouble him. Word of the Duke's unexpected visit spread quickly throughout the household, and by evening, everyone had gathered anxiously around the dining table, eager to understand precisely what the confrontation might mean for their collective future. Wendell, Peter, Silas, Margaret, and Ivy all listened carefully as Seraphina recounted the exchange in careful detail, their expressions reflecting shared concern regarding the uncertain outcome still hanging over their continued efforts. He mentioned correspondence, Peter observed thoughtfully once Seraphina finished her account. Someone specifically wrote to him expressing concern regarding your growing visibility here. That strongly suggests Lady Vale's continued involvement, precisely as we suspected. I believe so as well, Seraphina agreed, genuine frustration evident beneath her measured tone. Yet I cannot prove it directly, and even suspecting her involvement provides little practical means of countering whatever influence she continues exerting within the Duke's own household. Perhaps it is time, Wendell suggested carefully, to seek more direct confirmation regarding Lady Vale's activities. If we could obtain genuine proof of her deliberate interference, both the earlier sabotage and this recent manipulation of the Duke's concerns, such evidence would considerably strengthen your position, rather than leaving you vulnerable to continued uncertain rumor and manipulation. Seraphina considered this suggestion carefully, recognizing genuine wisdom within it, despite the evident difficulty such investigation would require. I have spent considerable effort defending my position reactively, responding to whatever challenge Constance presents, rather than proactively uncovering the truth behind her scheming. That approach must change, if I hope to resolve this uncertainty permanently, rather than continuing to exist beneath its constant, uncertain shadow. That evening, once the household had finally settled and retired following their anxious discussion, Serafina wrote a careful letter to Julian, explaining the Duke's unexpected visit and requesting whatever additional assistance his considerable business connections might provide toward uncovering definitive proof of Constance's involvement in both the earlier sabotage and her apparent manipulation of the Duke's current concerns. His reply arrived within days, considerably more encouraging than she had dared hope. Through careful, discreet inquiry among his trading connections, Julian had managed to identify a clerk employed within the same household as the Duke's personal secretary, someone who might possess genuine knowledge regarding the specific correspondence that had prompted the Duke's recent visit and troubling concerns. "I believe," Julian wrote, "that with appropriate discretion and perhaps modest compensation for information provided, we might successfully confirm precisely who authored the correspondence troubling the Duke, and whether it indeed originated from Lady Vale, as we both strongly suspect. I intend to pursue this inquiry personally, given the considerable stakes involved for your continued circumstances." Serafina felt genuine gratitude at Julian's continued, steadfast support throughout this increasingly complicated conflict, recognizing how fortunate she had been to encounter someone willing to invest such considerable effort toward protecting her interests, despite having known her only these several months since his unexpected arrival during that first autumn storm. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Serafina, the Duke himself remained genuinely conflicted regarding his eventual decision. Returning to the city following his unexpected visit to Blackthorn Hollow, he found himself unable to fully dismiss the genuine evidence of Serafina's remarkable achievement, evidence that stood in stark, undeniable contrast to the carefully framed concerns Constance had so patiently cultivated within his household these past weeks. He summoned his personal secretary privately, seeking clarification regarding precisely how the initial concerns regarding Serafina's growing visibility had first reached his attention. The secretary, somewhat uncomfortably, admitted that a young noblewoman named Lady Constance Vale had raised the matter during a chance social encounter weeks earlier, suggesting the Duke might wish to reconsider his current arrangement, given Serafina's increasingly public profile. "Lady Vale," the Duke repeated slowly, something suspicious flickering behind his tired, calculating eyes. "Might I ask what particular interest this woman holds regarding my ward's circumstances at Blackthorn Hollow specifically?" The secretary could not immediately answer, though the Duke's own considerable experience navigating noble intrigue and manipulation suggested increasingly troubling possibilities regarding Constance's true motivations. Perhaps, he considered carefully, his original judgment regarding Serafina had been influenced by circumstances considerably more manipulated than he had initially recognized. He resolved, quietly, to investigate the matter further before making any final decision regarding Serafina's continued circumstances, recognizing that whatever verdict he eventually reached carried considerable weight, not merely for his ward's future, but for his own judgment and integrity as head of his family's considerable holdings and reputation. Back at Blackthorn Hollow, several days passed without further word from either the Duke or from Julian's ongoing discreet inquiries, and the uncertain waiting proved considerably difficult for Serafina's usually steady composure. She threw herself into the estate's continued management with renewed determination, partly to distract herself from the anxious uncertainty hanging over her circumstances, and partly because she genuinely refused to allow fear of an uncertain future to halt the genuine progress she had worked so hard to achieve. During this uneasy period, Serafina found herself walking frequently through the estate's now flourishing gardens in the early evening hours, seeking quiet reflection amid the settling dusk. She thought often of the frightened young woman who had first arrived at these gates, uncertain and grieving, and marveled at how thoroughly her circumstances and her own understanding of her genuine worth had transformed since that difficult beginning. "You seem troubled this evening, my lady," Margaret observed one such evening, finding Serafina standing quietly near the restored fountain that had once been nothing more than a cracked, dry basin choked with weeds. "I find myself caught between hope and considerable uncertainty," Serafina admitted honestly. "Everything we have built here remains genuinely at risk, dependent upon a decision I cannot control, made by a man whose judgment has already proven mistaken once before." Yet you handled his visit with genuine courage, Margaret reminded her gently. Whatever he ultimately decides, my lady, you have already proven considerably more than he ever expected of you. That achievement cannot be undone, regardless of whatever verdict eventually follows. Serafina found genuine comfort in Margaret's steady reassurance, recognizing the truth within her words, even as uncertainty continued lingering beneath her composed exterior. Whatever the Duke eventually decided, she reminded herself firmly, the genuine transformation she had achieved at Blackthorn Hollow, and within herself, remained real and lasting, regardless of any external judgment that might yet follow. A week after the Duke's unexpected visit, a letter arrived from Julian, carrying news that proved considerably more significant than Serafina had anticipated. His discreet inquiries had finally yielded genuine results, confirming definitively that Lady Constance Vale had indeed authored the troubling correspondence that first prompted the Duke's concerns, and further, that considerable evidence now existed linking her family's mounting financial difficulties directly to a long-standing scheme intended to eventually acquire Blackthorn Hollow cheaply, once its continued neglect had sufficiently diminished its perceived value. I have obtained written testimony from the clerk I mentioned previously, Julian's letter explained, along with correspondence between Lady Vale and her family's solicitor, discussing their original intentions regarding this estate's eventual acquisition. I believe, my lady, we finally possess sufficient evidence to expose her scheme entirely, and to clear your name of whatever doubt her manipulation has cast upon your continued circumstances here. Serafina read the letter twice, genuine relief and renewed determination flooding through her in equal measure. Finally, after months of uncertain suspicion and careful, patient investigation, she possessed genuine proof capable of exposing Constance's deliberate scheming and securing her own uncertain position beyond any reasonable doubt or manipulation. She immediately began planning how best to present this crucial evidence, recognizing that timing and presentation would prove genuinely critical toward ensuring the Duke understood fully the deliberate manipulation that had shaped his recent concerns, rather than allowing Constance any further opportunity to obscure or deny her clearly documented involvement. Whatever reconsideration the Duke's visit had prompted, Serafina understood clearly now that the true resolution of her circumstances remained close at hand, the evidence Julian had gathered finally providing genuine means of confronting Constance's scheme directly, and of proving, beyond any reasonable doubt, exactly how thoroughly both the Duke's original judgment and Constance's deliberate manipulation had been proven mistaken. Lady Constance Vale arrived at Blackthorn Hollow, demanding immediate audience, her carefully composed elegance cracking visibly for the first time since Serafina had first encountered her, and something in her sharp eyes suggested she already suspected her carefully constructed scheme was beginning to unravel. Lady Ashworth, she said, her voice considerably less smooth than during their previous encounters. I understand. You have been making rather serious accusations regarding my conduct, spreading among certain circles, claims I consider entirely unfounded and deeply insulting. Serafina, who had been expecting this confrontation ever since Julian's letter arrived confirming the extent of Constance's scheming, met her visitor's evident distress with careful, measured composure. I have made no accusations without genuine evidence to support them, Lady Vale. Perhaps you might explain, instead, precisely why correspondence bearing your handwriting reached the Duke's household, expressing carefully calculated concerns regarding my continued presence here. Constance's expression flickered briefly, genuine alarm replacing her earlier practiced composure, before she managed to reassert some measure of careful control. I do not know what you are suggesting, but whatever correspondence you claim to possess proves nothing beyond simple concern any reasonable person might express regarding your increasingly public profile. Simple concern, Serafina repeated evenly, or deliberate manipulation, intended to convince the Duke that reversing his arrangement served his own interests, thereby allowing your family opportunity to acquire this estate cheaply, once my restoration efforts were sufficiently undermined? The color drained visibly from Constance's face at this direct confrontation, her carefully maintained composure finally shattering entirely. How? She began, then stopped herself abruptly, clearly recognizing the danger of revealing too much through her own reaction. I possess written testimony, Serafina continued steadily, confirming your family's original intentions regarding this property, along with correspondence directly linking you to the concerns raised within the Duke's household. I also possess, I should mention, considerable suspicion regarding certain acts of deliberate sabotage that occurred here some months ago, sabotage involving materials and knowledge considerably beyond what any simple villager might possess. Constance's composure crumbled further, genuine desperation now clearly visible beneath her earlier calculated elegance. "You do not understand the pressures my family faces," she said, her voice suddenly considerably less controlled than her earlier careful manipulation had suggested. Mounting debts, diminishing prospects, an entire family's future depending upon securing some means of restoring our fortunes. This estate represented genuine opportunity, opportunity your unexpected arrival threatened to destroy entirely. "By attempting to destroy my own genuine efforts instead," Serafina replied, though something within her softened slightly at the evident desperation underlying Constance's admission. "I understand desperation, Lady Vale, considerably more than you might realize. I arrived here myself with nothing, cast aside by those who believed me worthless. Yet I chose to build something genuine, through honest effort, rather than seeking to profit through another's downfall." Constance said nothing for a long, uncomfortable moment, her earlier defiant composure finally giving way entirely to something considerably more vulnerable. "What do you intend to do with this evidence you claim to possess?" "Fear," she asked finally, genuine fear evident within her quiet question. Serafina considered her response carefully, recognizing genuine opportunity within this moment to demonstrate exactly the character that had guided her own remarkable transformation these past months. "I intend to present it to the Duke, Lady Vale, ensuring he understands fully the deliberate manipulation that shaped his recent concerns regarding my circumstances here. Beyond that, I have no particular desire to see your family further ruined. Whatever your desperate motivations, I recognize genuine hardship when I encounter it, even when it has been directed unjustly against my own interests." Something shifted within Constance's expression at this unexpected mercy, genuine surprise mixing uneasily with residual defensive pride. "Why would you show me such consideration, given everything I have attempted against you?" "Because I understand what it means to be judged solely by one's worst circumstances, rather than genuine character," Serafina replied simply. "I do not excuse what you have done, Lady Vale. Your actions caused genuine harm and considerable uncertainty throughout these past months, but I choose not to meet your desperation with equivalent cruelty, believing genuinely that such choices reflect more accurately upon my own character than upon whatever judgment you might deserve." Constance departed shortly afterward, considerably more subdued than her earlier arrival, though Serafina noted genuine, if reluctant, respect within her final departing glance. Whatever resolution eventually followed regarding Constance's family circumstances, Serafina felt confident she had handled the confrontation with integrity, matching everything she had worked to build these past months. Word of the unfolding truth reached the Duke considerably faster than Serafina had anticipated, Julian having already arranged for the documented evidence to reach the Duke's personal secretary, through carefully discreet channels, ensuring the full truth became undeniably clear, before Constance possessed any further opportunity to obscure or manipulate the circumstances surrounding her scheme. The Duke himself arrived at Blackthorn Hollow again barely a week later, this time with considerably less guarded uncertainty evident within his expression as he stepped down from his carriage. Serafina, having anticipated this visit following Julian's confirmation that the evidence had reached him successfully, greeted him with careful, measured composure, despite the genuine hope stirring beneath her outward calm. "Lady Ashworth," the Duke said, his tone carrying something considerably more contrite than his previous guarded skepticism, "I have reviewed the evidence provided regarding Lady Vale's deliberate manipulation of my concerns. I confess, I owe you considerable apology for allowing such calculated interference to influence my judgment regarding your genuine circumstances here." "Your Grace need not apologize," Serafina replied, though genuine relief flooded through her at his evident acknowledgement. "You were, after all, presented with carefully manipulated information designed specifically to exploit your legitimate concerns regarding your family's reputation. Nonetheless," the Duke continued, "I bear responsibility for allowing such manipulation to nearly cost you everything you have worked so determinedly to build here. Having now witnessed firsthand the genuine transformation you have achieved, and understanding fully the deliberate scheme that nearly undermined it. I recognize clearly how thoroughly I misjudged your character when I first exiled you here, believing you capable only of disappearing quietly, rather than genuine achievement. Serafina felt something profound settling within her chest at this unexpected, genuine acknowledgement from the man who had once so casually dismissed her worth. Thank you, Your Grace. Your acknowledgement means considerably more than you likely realize. I intend to make amends properly, the Duke continued, genuine resolve evident within his measured tone. Given everything you have accomplished here, transforming this abandoned estate into something genuinely remarkable, through your own determination and character, I believe formal recognition of your achievement and permanent security regarding your continued circumstances represents the very least I owe you. Serafina felt hope rising steadily within her chest, though she remained cautiously composed, uncertain exactly what form the Duke's promised amends might ultimately take. What precisely do you propose, Your Grace? The Duke studied her carefully for a long moment before answering, something resembling genuine respect finally settling fully within his expression. I propose formally transferring ownership of Blackthorn Hollow to you directly, Lady Ashworth, as fitting compensation for the genuine value you have created here, and as permanent acknowledgement that my original judgment regarding your character was considerably mistaken. This estate belongs, by every genuine measure of merit, to you and the dedicated household who helped you transform it. The proposal left Serafina momentarily speechless, genuine emotion threatening to overwhelm her carefully maintained composure entirely. After months of uncertain vulnerability, of building something remarkable while remaining constantly aware it could be taken from her at any moment, she finally found herself offered genuine, permanent security, recognition of everything she had worked so tirelessly to achieve. Your Grace, she said finally, her voice carrying genuine emotion she no longer attempted to fully suppress. I accept your proposal with genuine gratitude, and with recognition of exactly how far we have both traveled since that difficult evening you first exiled me here. The Duke offered something approaching a genuine smile, the first Serafina had ever witnessed cross his typically guarded features. Then let us proceed with the necessary formal arrangements, Lady Ashworth. Blackthorn Hollow, and everything you have built here, belongs entirely to you now. Before departing, the Duke paused thoughtfully near his waiting carriage, turning back to address her once more. Regarding Lady Vale, he said carefully, I understand you showed her considerable mercy, despite her deliberate scheming against you. I confess, given the genuine harm her actions nearly caused, I find myself curious regarding your reasoning. Her family faces genuine desperation, Your Grace, Serafina replied honestly. Whatever wrong she committed against me, I recognize that desperation drives people toward choices they might otherwise never consider. I do not excuse her actions, but neither do I wish to see her family further destroyed, particularly when genuine consequence has already followed from her scheme's failure. The Duke studied her thoughtfully, something like renewed respect flickering behind his tired eyes. Perhaps, he said finally, given your evident capacity for genuine mercy alongside your remarkable determination, I might consider whether some modest, honest arrangement could be found benefiting the Vale family, without rewarding their earlier deception. I shall consider the matter carefully, Lady Ashworth, though I make no immediate promises. With that, the Duke departed, leaving Serafina standing once more within her transformed entrance hall, though this time genuine joy, rather than anxious uncertainty, flooded through her entire being. She hurried immediately to share the remarkable news with her household, finding them gathered anxiously in the dining hall, having watched the Duke's carriage arrive and depart with evident nervous anticipation regarding whatever news it might bring. He has transferred ownership of Blackthorn Hollow to me, Serafina announced, scarcely able to contain her genuine joy as she shared the remarkable news, formally, permanently, in recognition of everything we have built here together these past months. The dining hall erupted immediately into genuine celebration, Mrs. Marsh embracing Serafina, with tears of evident joy streaming freely down her weathered cheeks, while Wendell, Peter, Silas, Margaret, and Ivy all crowded around offering enthusiastic congratulations and genuine embraces of shared triumph. We did this together, Serafina said, once the initial celebration had settled somewhat, addressing her devoted household with genuine emotion, evident within her voice. Whatever this estate now legally represents, It belongs to all of us, built through everyone's dedicated effort and genuine belief that forgotten things deserve genuine chance at renewal. I intend to ensure that recognition remains permanently reflected in how we continue managing Blackthorn Hollow together going forward. Mrs. Marsh, still wiping happy tears from her weathered cheeks, took Seraphina's hands within her own, with evident emotion. 20 years, my lady. I tended these grounds believing genuinely that no one would ever again care what became of this forgotten place. To witness this moment, this genuine triumph after everything we have endured together, I confess, it exceeds anything I ever dared imagine possible. Nor did I, Seraphina admitted, genuine happiness evident within her voice, despite the emotional weight of the moment. When I first arrived here, exiled and believing myself forgotten, I could not have imagined circumstances would eventually lead toward such remarkable transformation, for this estate, and for myself. That evening, once the initial celebration had gradually settled into quieter, more reflective conversation among her devoted household, Seraphina found a private moment to write immediately to Julian, sharing the remarkable news of the Duke's formal transfer of ownership and her genuine gratitude regarding his considerable assistance throughout the entire ordeal. His reply arrived within days, carrying genuine joy at her remarkable news, along with an unexpected personal announcement of his own. Business matters, he explained, would soon require his presence considerably more frequently throughout the surrounding region, circumstances he confessed he found himself rather pleased to embrace, given the genuine opportunity such proximity would provide toward continuing their growing acquaintance and mutual regard. Seraphina read his letter with genuine warmth spreading steadily through her chest, recognizing clearly how significantly Julian's steady presence and genuine support had shaped her circumstances these past months, from that first stormy evening encounter through the eventual resolution of Constance's deliberate scheming against her. She found herself, in the quiet days following the Duke's remarkable acknowledgement, reflecting frequently upon everything she had accomplished since that difficult evening of her original exile. The frightened young woman who had first arrived at Blackthorn Hollow's crumbling gates, believing herself forgotten and worthless, had transformed entirely into someone considerably more confident, someone who understood clearly that genuine worth depended not upon others' judgment, but upon one's own determined character and honest effort. Whatever challenges still lay ahead, whether continuing to manage her now permanently secured estate, navigating her growing regard for Julian, or determining precisely how her relationship with the wider region's noble circles might continue developing, Seraphina faced these future considerations with genuine confidence rather than anxious uncertainty, confidence earned through everything she had already overcome these past remarkable months. News of the Duke's formal transfer spread quickly throughout the surrounding villages and neighboring estates, carried enthusiastically by those who had witnessed Blackthorn Hollow's remarkable transformation firsthand, and genuinely celebrated this fitting resolution to Seraphina's difficult circumstances. In the village where Peter's family still resided, and where Wendell had spent decades quietly tending the estate's grounds largely unnoticed, the news brought genuine celebration among people who had come to see Seraphina's success as something belonging, in some small measure, to the entire community. "They are saying throughout the village that justice has finally been done," Peter reported, having visited his family shortly after the news became widely known. "My own mother wept upon hearing it, my lady, recalling how difficult these past years have been for families like ours, and how rare it feels to witness genuine merit finally receiving proper recognition, rather than being overlooked in favor of birth and privilege alone." Seraphina felt the weight of this wider significance settling meaningfully within her chest, recognizing that her own triumph represented something considerably larger than simple personal vindication. Throughout the surrounding region, families who had struggled against circumstances beyond their control, who had watched opportunity repeatedly favor those born into privilege rather than genuine merit, found within her story something worth genuine celebration, proof that determined effort and honest character could still triumph, even against considerable odds. "Then let us ensure this triumph benefits considerably more than merely ourselves," Seraphina said thoughtfully, addressing her household during their evening meal that same day. "I intend to establish fair, ongoing employment for everyone who has helped rebuild this estate, along with opportunities for others throughout the surrounding villages who might benefit from honest work and genuine investment in their own futures, much as each of you was given here. The proposal met with enthusiastic approval throughout her gathered household, Mrs. Marsh nodding with evident satisfaction, while Wendell and Peter exchanged genuinely pleased glances at the prospect of extending Blackthorn Hollow's remarkable transformation toward benefiting their wider community considerably more broadly. As autumn deepened steadily toward the promise of approaching winter, Blackthorn Hollow stood transformed entirely from the abandoned, forgotten ruin Serafina had first encountered months earlier. Now firmly secured as her own permanent possession, celebrated throughout the region as genuine testament to determination and honest character, the estate represented everything she had once believed impossible when she first arrived here, exiled and uncertain, believing herself forgotten by everyone who once mattered. Yet even amid this remarkable triumph, Serafina understood clearly that her story remained far from fully complete. Whatever future still awaited her, whether continuing to develop Blackthorn Hollow's remarkable legacy, deepening her genuine connection with Julian, or discovering entirely new opportunities she had not yet imagined possible, she faced these coming chapters with the same determined confidence that had carried her through every previous challenge these past remarkable months. A formal letter arrived from the Duke barely a month after transferring ownership, requesting Serafina's presence at a gathering within his own city household, and her hands trembled slightly as she read the invitation, uncertain what additional developments this unexpected request might bring. She traveled to the city with Mrs. Marsh, accompanying her for support, arriving at the grand Rothmere townhouse she had once called home, though it now felt considerably foreign after her months of transformation at Blackthorn Hollow. The Duke greeted her personally upon arrival, his demeanor considerably warmer than any previous interaction throughout her years as his ward. "Lady Ashworth," he said, using her formal title, with evident genuine respect, rather than the dismissive tone he had once employed. "Thank you for accepting my invitation. I confess I have several matters I wish to discuss with you directly, matters I believe you will find genuinely encouraging." He guided her into his private study, the very room where he had once so casually dismissed her future, exiling her to what he believed would be permanent obscurity. Now, standing within those same walls, Serafina felt the profound weight of how thoroughly circumstances had transformed since that difficult evening. "I have given considerable thought to your situation regarding Lady Vale," the Duke began, settling into his chair while gesturing for her to sit comfortably across from him. "Given your evident mercy toward her family despite their scheming against you, I have arranged modest but honest employment for her within a distant relation's household, sufficient to help address their most pressing financial difficulties, without rewarding her earlier deception with anything resembling genuine advantage." "That seems a fitting resolution, Your Grace," Serafina replied, genuinely pleased that some measure of consequence, tempered with reasonable compassion, had been found for Constance's difficult circumstances. "Additionally," the Duke continued, "I have been considering more broadly how my own household might better support genuine merit, rather than simply protecting inherited privilege and reputation above all else. Your remarkable transformation of Blackthorn Hollow has taught me something I confess I should have understood considerably earlier in my life, that genuine character and determined effort deserve recognition, regardless of birth or circumstance." Serafina listened carefully, genuine curiosity building regarding precisely what the Duke intended by sharing these reflections so openly. "What precisely are you proposing, Your Grace?" "I wish to establish a formal fund," he explained, "supporting promising individuals throughout my lands who demonstrate genuine merit and determination, regardless of their birth circumstances, providing opportunities for education, apprenticeship, or business development that might otherwise remain forever beyond their reach. I would be honored, Lady Ashworth, if you would consider overseeing this endeavor, given your own remarkable understanding of what genuine opportunity can accomplish when combined with honest determination." The proposal left Serafina genuinely moved, recognizing within it not merely practical opportunity, but genuine acknowledgement of everything she had come to believe throughout her remarkable journey these past months. "I would be honored to accept such responsibility, Your Grace, though I confess, my primary commitment must remain toward Blackthorn Hollow and the household who helped me rebuild it." "Of course," the Duke agreed readily. "I envision this endeavor complementing your existing efforts rather than competing with them, Perhaps Blackthorn Hollow itself might eventually serve as something of a model, demonstrating precisely what genuine investment in overlooked potential can accomplish. Their conversation continued for considerable time, discussing practical details regarding this new endeavor, and Serafina found herself, by its conclusion, viewing the Duke with something approaching genuine respect, rather than the wary distrust that had characterized their relationship for so many years previously. Whatever his original failures in judgment, he appeared genuinely committed now toward meaningful reconsideration of values he had perhaps too long taken for granted. Returning to Blackthorn Hollow following this remarkable visit, Serafina found herself increasingly occupied with balancing her continued estate management, alongside this promising new philanthropic endeavor, work that brought genuine fulfillment, beyond even the considerable satisfaction she had already found in restoring her own remarkable home. Julian, meanwhile, had made good on his earlier promise regarding increased business presence throughout the surrounding region, visiting Blackthorn Hollow with growing regularity as autumn deepened fully into winter's approaching chill. Their relationship, having developed steadily from that first stormy evening encounter through months of genuine mutual support and growing affection, had grown into something considerably deeper than either had perhaps initially anticipated. "I confess," Julian said one particularly clear winter evening, as they walked together through the estate's carefully maintained gardens, now dusted lightly with the season's first genuine snowfall. "I find myself increasingly unable to imagine my future without your continued presence within it, Serafina." She turned toward him, genuine warmth spreading through her chest despite the winter chill surrounding them both. "I confess, I share that particular difficulty myself, Julian. Whatever remarkable transformation I have achieved here at Blackthorn Hollow, I recognize clearly how significantly your steady support and genuine affection contributed toward making such achievement possible." "Then might I propose," Julian said carefully, genuine nervousness evident beneath his usually confident demeanor, "that we consider building our future together more formally? I do not wish to rush matters, given everything you have already accomplished and continue building here, but I find myself genuinely hopeful regarding what our continued partnership might eventually become." Serafina considered his proposal carefully, recognizing genuine happiness building steadily within her chest, despite her characteristic careful deliberation regarding significant decisions. "I would welcome that future, Julian, though I must ask that whatever we build together respects fully my continued commitment toward Blackthorn Hollow and everyone who helped me transform it. This estate, and the household who rebuilt it alongside me, remains genuinely essential to who I have become." "I would expect nothing less," Julian replied, genuine relief and happiness evident within his warm smile. "Indeed, I find myself increasingly drawn toward establishing my own business interests more permanently throughout this region, rather than continuing my previous constant travel. Blackthorn Hollow, and everything you have built here, has come to feel considerably more like genuine home than anywhere else I have previously known." Their quiet understanding, sealed with genuine warmth beneath the softly falling snow, marked the beginning of a partnership built upon mutual respect, shared values, and genuine appreciation for character over circumstance, precisely the qualities Serafina had come to value most deeply throughout her remarkable journey these past months. Their quiet understanding, sealed with genuine warmth beneath the softly falling snow, marked the beginning of a partnership built upon mutual respect, shared values, and genuine appreciation for character over circumstance, precisely the qualities Serafina had come to value most deeply throughout her remarkable journey these past months. News of their growing understanding spread quickly throughout the region, much as every other significant development in Serafina's remarkable story had done, and Lady Ashcombe, ever eager to celebrate genuine triumph, insisted upon hosting a grand gathering at Blackthorn Hollow itself the following spring, marking both the estate's complete restoration and the promising future Serafina and Julian appeared to be building together. "You must allow me this indulgence," Lady Ashcombe insisted, when Serafina expressed gentle hesitation regarding such considerable celebration. "This estate has become something of a legend throughout our circles, my dear. Everyone who has heard your remarkable story wishes genuine opportunity to witness it firsthand and to celebrate alongside you properly." Serafina eventually agreed, recognizing genuine value in marking this significant milestone properly, both for herself and for the devoted household who had worked so tirelessly alongside her throughout the entire remarkable journey. As spring arrived, bringing renewed life to the estate's carefully tended gardens, preparations began in earnest for what promised to become the most significant gathering Blackthorn Hollow had yet hosted. The day of the celebration arrived clear and bright, spring sunshine flooding warmly across grounds now bursting with color. The gardens Margaret had tended so carefully, finally reaching their full, glorious bloom. Carriages began arriving steadily throughout the morning, carrying guests from across the region, many of whom had followed Serafina's remarkable story from its earliest beginnings. Others simply curious to witness firsthand the legendary transformation everyone continued discussing so enthusiastically. "I confess," one elderly gentleman remarked, studying the magnificent restored entrance with evident fascination as he arrived among the earliest guests, "I never expected to see the day when Blackthorn Hollow's doors would become the very destination everyone throughout this region genuinely wished to enter, rather than the forgotten ruin everyone once avoided entirely." Serafina, greeting her arriving guests personally alongside her devoted household, felt genuine, profound satisfaction, witnessing this remarkable transformation reach its natural, celebratory conclusion. The very entrance meant originally to symbolize her quiet disappearance into obscurity had instead become, through months of determined effort and genuine character, precisely the opposite. The single door throughout the entire region that everyone now genuinely wished to walk through themselves. Throughout the afternoon and into the evening, guests wandered admiringly through every corner of the magnificently restored estate, praising the conservatory's warm sunlight, the garden's glorious spring bloom, the dining hall's elegant restoration, and above all, the remarkable story of determination and genuine character that had transformed such complete ruin into something worth genuine, lasting celebration. The Duke himself attended, arriving with considerably more warmth and genuine pride than Serafina could have possibly imagined during those difficult early days of her exile. "I confess," he told several assembled guests during the celebration, his voice carrying genuine, evident pride. "Lady Ashworth's remarkable achievement here represents precisely the character and determination I have come to believe our entire region should genuinely celebrate and support, regardless of birth or circumstance." Julian remained close beside Serafina throughout much of the celebration, his quiet, steady presence offering genuine comfort amid the considerable attention and admiration surrounding her that day. As evening settled gently across the celebrating gathering, he drew her aside briefly, finding a quiet moment amid the flowering garden paths, away from the main crowd of admiring guests. "Do you recall," he asked softly, "that first stormy evening we met, when I arrived here soaked through and exhausted, uncertain what shelter I might find along such isolated countryside roads?" "I recall it vividly," Serafina replied, genuine warmth spreading through her chest at the memory. "I confess I did not imagine, that difficult evening, precisely how significantly your unexpected arrival would eventually shape everything that followed." "Nor did I," Julian admitted, taking her hand gently within his own, beneath the gathering evening starlight. "Yet I find myself genuinely grateful, every single day since, for whatever fortunate circumstance guided me toward your door that particular evening, uncertain and searching for simple shelter, only to discover something considerably more significant waiting within." They stood together quietly for several long, peaceful moments, surrounded by the gentle sounds of continued celebration drifting from the estate's magnificently restored halls, the fragrant scent of spring blossoms mingling pleasantly with distant laughter, and warm candlelight spilling generously through newly repaired windows. "Whatever comes next," Serafina said finally, genuine confidence and quiet happiness coloring her steady voice, "I believe we shall face it together, building whatever future awaits us, with the same determination that transformed this forgotten place into something genuinely worth celebrating." "Together," Julian agreed, genuine warmth and steady commitment evident within his simple, sincere reply. As winter settled fully across the transformed estate, following that remarkable spring celebration marking Blackthorn Hollow's complete restoration, Serafina found herself reflecting frequently upon everything she had accomplished since that difficult evening of her original exile. The grand entrance, once broken and forgotten, now welcomed a steady stream of admiring visitors throughout every season. The conservatory flooded regularly with warm sunlight through carefully maintained glass panels. The gardens, though currently resting beneath winter's gentle snow, promised genuine renewal come spring, much as the entire estate itself had promised renewal to Serafina during her own darkest, most uncertain days. Her household, once assembled through simple necessity and shared circumstance, had grown into something considerably more meaningful. Genuine family bound together through shared triumph over adversity and mutual commitment toward continued success. Mrs. Marsh, Wendell, Peter, Silas, Margaret, and Ivy each held permanent, secure positions within the estate's continued management, their combined efforts having transformed not merely a forgotten building, but an entire community's understanding of what genuine determination could accomplish against seemingly impossible circumstances. Mrs. Marsh, now considerably more comfortable within her permanent role overseeing the estate's household affairs, often remarked with quiet satisfaction upon how far Blackthorn Hollow had traveled since those lonely years she had spent tending it virtually alone, believing genuinely that no one would ever again care what became of this forgotten corner of the countryside. Wendell, his weathered hands still capable despite his advancing years, had taken genuine pride in training Peter and several younger workers in the careful craft of maintaining the estate's grounds and structures, ensuring the knowledge he had accumulated across decades would continue benefiting Blackthorn Hollow long after his own eventual retirement. Peter and Silas, meanwhile, had established a modest but genuinely respected reputation throughout the region for their skilled restoration work, receiving increasing commissions from neighboring estates eager to replicate even a fraction of what they had accomplished at Blackthorn Hollow. Margaret's gardens had become renowned throughout the surrounding countryside, visitors frequently requesting cuttings and seeds to establish similar blooms within their own properties. Ivy, having grown considerably more confident since her earliest uncertain days within the household, had taken on increasing responsibility helping coordinate the estate's now regular gatherings and visiting guests. The Duke, once so quick to dismiss Serafina's worth entirely, now spoke of her achievements with genuine pride whenever her name arose within his own social circles, his own understanding of merit and character having been genuinely reshaped through witnessing her remarkable transformation firsthand. Lady Constance Vale, meanwhile, having received both genuine consequence and reasonable compassion for her earlier scheming, found herself building a considerably more honest, if modest, future within her new circumstances, perhaps having learned valuable lessons of her own regarding the genuine cost of desperate manipulation over honest effort. And Serafina herself, once a frightened young woman exiled to what everyone believed would become her quiet, forgotten grave, had instead built something no one could have possibly anticipated when she first arrived at those crumbling, forgotten gates. She had transformed genuine ruin into genuine triumph, proving decisively that being cast aside need not mean being worthless, that forgotten things, whether crumbling estates or discarded people, deserved genuine chance at remarkable renewal. Standing once more upon Blackthorn Hollow's magnificently restored front steps that winter evening, watching gentle snow settle softly across grounds that had once lain forgotten and neglected for decades, Serafina Ashworth allowed herself, finally and completely, to feel genuine peace regarding everything she had accomplished. The Duke had sent her here believing she would simply disappear, forgotten and irrelevant, into obscurity matching this once abandoned estate's own forgotten circumstances. Instead, she had transformed this quiet corner of forgotten countryside into precisely the opposite, the one place, throughout the entire region, that everyone now genuinely wished to call their own destination, their own door worth opening, their own story worth witnessing and celebrating. She had not simply survived her exile, she had built, from nothing but genuine determination and honest character, an entire remarkable life no one, least of all herself, had ever believed truly possible.